Chapter 21 Personal Tools. The next morning, when Dominic came down for breakfast, there was a small pile of gear in the middle of the floor that he knew hadn't been there the night before. "What's all this? Do you need me to put it away while you work?" he called out to Pops, who was in the storage room. "No need. That's all for you. You made it to level 2 apprentice blacksmithing, and it's traditional for your master to gift you your first set of tools when you advance for the first time. Know that after this, you'll need to make your own tools, so take good care of them." The old dwarf called back. There was a collection of chisels, files, and sharpening stones, a small anvil, a stone travel forge stocked with coal, tongs, pokers, a leather roll pouch with pockets for everything, and a short-handled 2-kilogram hammer, much like the one that Pops used, except brand new. "This is beautiful, thank you," Dominic informed him with a heartfelt smile when he came back into the forge room. "I'm glad you like it. Pack all that away and head out front. We should have morning customers soon, and as a level 2 apprentice you'll need to take a traveling mission soon. Even if you weren't planning on trying for a job at the palace to make weapons for the lovely ladies of the Royal Guard," Pops explained. Dominic had never heard anything like a travel requirement, so maybe it was just a blacksmith thing. But then, above apprentices were journeymen. Perhaps the name was literal, and you really had to go on a journey before you could advance. But he was only level 2 right now, and his blacksmithing trade skill gem had to reach level 5 before he could move from the apprentice to journeyman ranks. The bell above the door rang, and a pair of adventurers came in looking for a shovel, and then another group for a saw blade. It was the usual rhythm of the morning, just as Pops had warned him. A few last-minute purchases by the adventurers headed out early, and then the farmers and tradesmen would come in an hour or two for tools, after which the morning would get quiet and they could work. He was just about to head into the back room to join Pops when a stout man in a gaudy purple coat and gold vest came wobbling into the shop, looking somewhat disdainful at his surroundings. "How might I help you this morning, good sir?" Dominic greeted him. "Who are you?" "I'm here to talk to the Master Smith. Go fetch him," the man demanded. "Master Smith, there is a portly gentleman here to speak with you," Dominic called back into the forge, while pretending that he didn't hear the angry grumbling of the man behind him. Pops came out with his signature dour expression, and the snobbish man actually smiled. "It is good to see you again, Master Smith. I was told that you might be able to help me find an apprentice smith who is qualified for traveling work. My blacksmith quit on me, and there are 22 steam wagons in my caravan, ready to leave for Eramo's village." Pops chuckled and tilted his chin toward Dominic. "That's my apprentice, but I don't know that he's going to work for you after you insulted him. Since when do dwarves take little mixed blood mutts as apprentices? Now, where is your actual apprentice? I need to get these goods underway, and we can't go without a maintenance smith," the man replied. They both just stared at him and waited for the merchant to realize that they were serious. But that never happened, and instead he stomped out in a rage only a few seconds later. The next half hour was quiet except for the ringing of hammers on anvils as the pair worked at making the day's tool orders. And then finally the bell jingled again, marking a new customer. "I'll be up front in a second." "Which order was yours?" Dominic called out, assuming it was one of the farmers or craftsmen there to pick up tools they had ordered yesterday. "Actually, I need to speak to one of the smiths here," pleasant male voice called back. Dominic came out to greet the customer and found a slender man in a bright gold coat over a black suit with cogwork accessories and a matching top hat. "What can I help you with today? We've got a pretty good stock of equipment for merchants," he suggested. "Well, you see, some blithering jackass came to my caravan and stole my blacksmith away with the promise of a huge bonus. So I need a repair worker for my next trip," he replied, while nervously rubbing the back of his neck. Dominic heard Pop's laughter from the back room, and he gave the merchant a sad smile. "I'm afraid that's partially our fault. He was being an ass, so we refused his employment offer and kicked him out of the shop." The merchant smirked. "Serves him right. I'm sure my man will come back once we get to Eramo's village, and he gets his bonus, but I need someone to get us there. You never know when something is going to break, and for that we need a smith." Pops gestured to Dominic. "My apprentice has just reached level 2, and he's ready for his first trip, but this is a toolmaker's forge, not a steamsmith. While he knows his way around the forge, we don't work with steam motors, Magitech drives, or any other sorts of vehicles. The man just shrugged. At this point, any smith will do. I know how the trucks work, but I don't have the skill to fix them in anything resembling a timely manner. I took merchant as my trade skill. I can show him what to fix if it breaks, as long as he has the skill to fix it. That shouldn't be a problem. He can help with the weapons for your guards as well. That is part of the job he excels at. The old dwarf informed him proudly. Really? Dominic took out the dagger he made last night and set it on the counter between them. To someone with a merchant's magical skills for item evaluation, a crafted item's creator was easily discernible, and the man's skepticism turned to shock as he saw that Dominic had indeed been the one to create the weapon. Once he was done examining it, Dominic put the weapon away and waited for his verdict. That is incredible workmanship for an apprentice. All right, I will hire you at the standard rate, 2 gold coins a day, plus materials for any services we need. He agreed. 2 whole gold a day, plus he supplied all the materials? That was almost too good to be true. He suspected that there would be a lot of work to be done. But for that sort of money, he wouldn't argue. Chapter 22 Earned Wages. After only 2 hours of traveling with his temporary employer, Dominic learned just why the wage was so high for a simple trip down the road. He had been using his newly minted skills to repair blunted weapons and poor attempts at sharpening when the cries of warning had sounded out from the back of the caravan. Goblins in the woods. Send the guards back. They're almost on us. The driver of the last transport wagon in line was shouting. More goblins coming from the flank. The guard beside Dominic's carriage yelled. He was halfway down the convoy, the most protected spot during most ambushes, and equal distance to both ends to distribute the spare ammunition and weapons. All of the guards climbed down from their position by the drivers, while the team members who were skilled with ranged weapons moved to the roof of the armored cargo boxes. There weren't nearly enough of them, only 3 archers, 1 mage and a gunner to cover 18 wagons, but the goblins were closing fast. Traveling through the woods, it made sense that they hired more melee fighters, but there were also guns in the blacksmith's carriage for times when they could react before the enemy arrived. Those with no combat skills or even those with a melee skill set could use the shotguns while relying on their own hand-eye coordination, which was a blessing for the merchant caravans, but against monsters with higher defense, the shotguns became much less effective as the monster hides got tougher. The gunslingers, rangers, and a few other specialties could use skills or spells to enhance the weapons and keep them effective against more powerful enemies. For the first part of the battle, Dominic only had to toss weapons to anyone who lost or broke theirs, but this group was pretty professional and the chances that someone had a lost or broken weapon they forgot to mention was pretty slim. Spears! The caravan leader shouted, and the guards took out what looked like fence panels made of poles, linked with 1 metal rod and topped with brutal barbed spearheads. It helped make up for their low numbers, and the first few goblins didn't even have an opportunity to stop before they skidded into the spear lines and were crushed by those behind them. The guards didn't hold on to them. Once the momentum of the goblin charge was stalled, they switched to their usual weapons. Steel meat, goblin flesh, and copper while Dominic picked his first target. He was about to unleash an arcane blast on the goblins when a sharp whistle caught his attention. The driver was motioning for him to wait and not draw attention to himself. Everyone on the team could and would fight, but they only had 1 blacksmith, and the carriages were almost guaranteed to take damage during the fight. As the number of goblins increased, the drivers took shotguns from their storage items or from under the seats and prepared to defend their livelihood. Smoke filled the air as the guns began to fire, and the closest goblins fell one after another. The defenders were still greatly outnumbered, and Dominic sighed at the lost chance for mana cores and loot, but his carriage was well defended, and his driver had taken a staff out of his inventory instead of a gun. Dominic hadn't noticed before, but the driver of his carriage was a cleric, the caravan's healer. It explained the number of defenders that collected around them, and the way that everyone in the ranged team kept track of what was happening around their carriage. 1 goblin made it past the guards, and Dominic took it out with an arcane blast, dropping it instantly. 1 kill was better than sitting and doing nothing, and at the rate the guards were eliminating the goblins, he wouldn't get many more. It all looked like it was going smoothly until there was a loud clang and a hissing noise. A goblin had managed to hide from the guards and attack a carriage, puncturing the steam chamber to immobilize it and buy time for more of its kinsfolk to get there. Blacksmith to position 7. The driver yelled, marking the location of the damaged vehicle. On it! Dominic yelled back as he grabbed some spare metal plates, then the torch and a handful of brazing rods. It would be a quick and dirty repair, but it would be better than letting the water completely drain. He ran across the top of the carriages and up the line to the damaged vehicle, where the driver was dragging the goblin's body out from underneath. He got the return valve with a club. The driver called as he heard the blacksmith land on the roof of the cargo box. No problem, I've got it. The driver knew his vehicle, and he'd released the pressure after he killed the goblin, saving most of the water and making it possible for Dominic to work as soon as he arrived. The valve wasn't completely knocked off, so Dominic used a block and hammer to knock it straight again, and then sealed the crack with a seam of new brass. Good to go. Give it a moment to cool and you can pressure it back up. He informed the driver, then spotted another goblin headed toward them, crawling through the grass. He fired another arcane blast while he searched the ground for bodies that weren't actually dead. Everywhere that he saw one still twitching, Dominic attacked, keeping the area around the wagons clear until the fight was over. Everyone back on board. Let's get gone before their friends arrive. The boss shouted, and Dominic ran back to his ride. The smithy wagon's driver was busy healing the guards, but he looked up when Dominic returned to the mobile forge. Might as well get that heated now. We've got lots to fix. How bad off is the carriage? The cleric asked. Damaged valve, I've got it fixed already. No worse than a broken tool handle. He replied. That's a relief. Those delaying tactics are the worst. It's like every monster in the forest knows when you're broken down. He muttered as he prepared the carriage to get moving again. Do these attacks happen a lot? Dominic asked, fearing the worst. Come to think of it, they've gotten a lot worse these last few months. At first, I thought it was our bad luck, but we've been attacked more than once every trip, and everyone else is complaining about goblins as well. We're not in the mountains where you expect dangerous sorts of monsters, so this many attacks is unusual. Chapter 23 Push Hard. As soon as everyone was on board, the steam carriages started moving again, trundling down the rough dirt road and out toward the grasslands and open fields that surrounded their destination. Once they were out of the trees, they should be relatively safe from attack, as the town guard patrols would be able to see and intercept any threats that might be coming their way. Or so Dominic had hoped. Instead, what they found was an ongoing battle between the guards and a much larger band of goblins, along with nearly 24 destroyed carriages. The guards saw the wagon caravan emerge from the road behind the goblin force, picking up speed as the road's quality improved closer to town, and began to frantically wave them forward before the lead steam tractor could try to stop. Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop. Once you're behind the lines, you will be safe. The guard captain yelled as the caravan approached. The team leader shouted back down the line of vehicles as he got the command. You heard the man, keep the speed up. Ranged fighters, give it your all. Everyone else, protect the wheels. Don't let them get us bogged down, or we will be stuck in the trees. The first vehicle cleared the tree line a second later, and the gunner on the second carriage began to rain bullets on the goblins. Dominic had never seen a skill like that before, and the gunner hadn't used it during the last battle, but it was magnificent. They fired until their guns were empty, and then reloaded in the blink of an eye and did it again. That had to be incredibly hard on the gunner's ammunition supply, but it kept the goblins away from the carriages, and the first few trucks were quickly past the melee without incident. The archers and mage were next up to guard the lines, while Dominic unleashed arcane blast on anything that got close enough to the vehicles that he could see it from his position halfway down the line. As his carriage got close to the tree line, where he would be able to see a wider angle, Dominic noticed that there were precious few casters and ranged fighters at the back, only warrior classes with bows as their secondary weapon, and drivers with shotguns. They had been doing a decent job on the front half of the convoy, but they also had the support of stronger ranged classes, who had actual specialty skills to support their attacks. You don't mind if I move back, do you? The back half is short on casters. Dominic called to his driver from the roof of the smithy carriage. "Why would you do that? I know you're a decent caster, but they can take care of themselves. Trust them." The driver called back. As much as Dominic was tempted to be stubborn, the man had a point. The team leader had set things up this way on purpose, and they hadn't lost anyone since the start of the trip, so it should all be working as intended. The guards had also gotten the goblin swarm a bit more under control during their battle, as the front of the convoy had done so much damage to the nearby enemies that the defenders who had already been in combat were able to regroup and force them away from the road again. If he had been thinking clearly and not caught up in the excitement of actually getting to be part of an adventure story, Dominic should have recognized the strategy. It was one that the knights in his childhood village were well versed in. So, from his spot on the roof, Dominic continued his barrage until the goblins were out of range, and the whole convoy was safely on the cobblestone road that led into Eramo's village. As they bounced down the road, Dominic made note of 3 important facts. The quality of the workmanship on the spring steel made a huge difference in how the various vehicles rode. Secondly, the trucks that were custom-built for cargo were much more stable than the ones which were retrofitted from a horse-drawn carriage template. And third, the guards and merchants were hiding all their good weapons in their storage, or in hidden compartments of the carriages if they didn't have a storage item. "What are they doing?" he whispered to the healer who drove the mobile smithy. "Oh yes, this is your first trip. You see, there is an entry tax based on the value of goods that we carry, and we are supposed to show them everything that we've got so they can assess it. Take out your worst gear and pretend that the carriage's tools are all that you have. The boss has already accounted for their value in the trip's fees. The lower we can value our gear, the cheaper it is to get a trade caravan into the village." That seemed incredibly petty for a village that relied on trade goods for their survival, but perhaps that was just the way of the world in Signia. Dominic decided as he put his good weapons away and took out a non-magical goblin dagger to slip into the plain leather sheath on his hip. Even the fine traveling cloaks went away, replaced with threadbare, unenchanted versions for the benefit of the guards. Dominic didn't have that luxury. All he had was the leather coat and the work clothes that he arrived in, and he hadn't been working anywhere near long enough for a new leather apron to wear out. "You should at least try to fool them. Don't you have a piece of goblin armor in your inventory?" The healer laughed when he noticed that Dominic hadn't changed his outfit. Dominic swapped his coat out for a hobgoblin shirt that he had in his inventory cube, intended to be washed and used as a shop rag, then shuddered in revulsion as the filthy cloth touched his skin. The healer chuckled and waved his hand in a dismissive gesture. "Better change back. They'll believe that even less than they would a boy in a set of palace initiate's armor pretending to be a merchant. Maybe put your smithy apron on instead of the coat, and they'll just see a penniless apprentice on his first trip." That was precisely what Dominic was, though. He didn't get paid in advance, so he was still very much a penniless apprentice, but he had a good apron, courtesy of Pops, and he changed into that instead of his only leather coat, then swung down into the smithy carriage to wait for their turn in line. Chapter 24: Eramo's Village. As they reached the front of the line and prepared to enter Eramo's village, Dominic heard a pounding on the armored door of his carriage, and swung the entry open to greet the guard. As he saw the guard's clothing, rough linen under his guard-issue chainmail, Dominic got a great idea. He had minor illusion available to him, and it wouldn't take much to change the appearance of his leather apron to a cheaper plain leather one, filthy with soot in a way suited to having been in the forge all day. A shimmer passed over him as he altered his clothing, but in the heat haze coming from the door, the guard didn't notice anything at all. Only a few seconds later, when the heat of the forge wagon had dissipated a little, did he look back in the door again to actually inspect Dominic. The man leaned in the door, then stepped back as the wind shifted and a wave of heat from the forge burst out of the entry, but did have time to take note of Dominic's sweaty but smiling face in the entryway. "Move the apron aside so I can check your weapons," he demanded in a monotone voice that let Dominic know he was just doing his job. He nodded as he looked at the crude hilts of the daggers, and then the plain linen clothes under the brand-new, but dirty apron. "Must have been a rough day if they brought a fresh green apprentice as their smith," he commented. Dominic chuckled as he remembered the words that the boss had used. Some pompous jackanape offered their usual smith a big bonus to go with him for the trip, so I got the call up at the last minute. Most money I've seen in my life. The guard laughed along with him. I'll bet it is. It's not often that an apprentice sees a whole gold coin, and even more rare that he will earn more than one at a time. I suggest that you ask him to split it into golden pennies or silver coins when you get paid tonight so that you don't have to hope that the shops have enough change. That is an excellent idea, thank you, Dominic replied, honestly impressed with the professionalism of the guard, who he noticed carried both a sword and a pistol on his hips. He passed on to the next carriage, and the healer gave Dominic a thumbs up and a sly wink, then lit a cigarette while they waited. He considered saying something about them being bad for his health, but that was the healer, he didn't really have to worry about such a small thing. Once the inspections were finished, the carriages passed through the gates and the leader directed them down a path that seemed familiar to everyone but Dominic, winding through the streets toward whatever customer had requested their goods today. They eventually found themselves in a smaller version of the gathering square that was across from Pop's Forge in the city, and Dominic noticed that it was set up more like a flea market than a parking lot. "Do you just sell everything right here?" he asked his driver, confused by the sight in front of them. "Some do, but we have a buyer. The problem is that the streets get crowded, since the whole village is filled with tightly packed apartment buildings. So we park here and the buyer sends someone to get it. The big transport vehicles can't make it down the side streets without completely blocking them in both directions," he explained. One by one, the boss handed out the day's pay as he made his way down the row. But he paused just before Dominic's wagon as a man on crutches with visible wounds and bandages on his face hobbled his way to the convoy. "Goddess, Tom, what in the world happened to you?" the boss shouted, then ran over to help the man up into the smithy carriage. The healer followed them in, quickly casting a series of spells on the wounded man, who was slumped in the well-worn bench seat of the carriage like he was home. "That idiot and his damnable promise of a big trip bonus is what happened to me. We were running from the goblins, and we had just made the clearing outside town when he ordered that we spread out and fight. Those idiots listened to him, but they didn't have a decent fighter among them, and the goblins had 3 shamans. We didn't have enough ranged fighters to take on the shamans, and the caravan guards were scraped up from the street, mostly academy dropouts who couldn't tell their ass from a tea kettle. They managed to lose to a bunch of ragtag goblins, and they probably would have even without the shaman's help. When the guards showed up to help, I packed my things and moved to the back to keep them supplied with arrows. Cost me my whole stock, but I made it back to town. They didn't have a healer left to deal with the injuries, and the goblins got the convoy leader as well. Turns out, he didn't even have enough on his body to pay the wages. He was betting that he would get enough from the sales to make a profit and pay us out the promised bonuses. The carriages are all trashed now, and the goods are mostly ruined, so the survivors couldn't even sell those to make up the difference," Tom explained. The healer patted him on the shoulder and pulled a blanket from under the seat. "Go to bed and sleep it off. We can scold you for greed and stupidity in the morning. It's good to have you back." The smith chuckled as he stretched out on the seat, finally noticing Dominic in the carriage, sitting next to the forge. "Is that my replacement? Heck, as cute as he is, I'm surprised you didn't kick me out on my ear," he joked. "He's a fine spellcaster as well. Picks off goblins like nobody's business, and each spell is a sure kill. If he was a fully trained smith, you might be in trouble." The convoy leader teased his old friend, before handing Dominic his day's wages in silver coin. "Oh? Where did you find that kind of multi-talented smith?" Tom asked. "He's Pop's apprentice." "Well, that's good luck for me. He will want his apprentice back after the return trip, I suppose. The old man doesn't take to very many people, so if he took an actual apprentice, he won't let his new one go so easily." Chapter 25, Overnight Stay. Dominic laughed as the smith and the boss shared stories of their trip, then realized that it was beginning to get late, and he hadn't made any arrangements for the night. With their usual smith back, he wouldn't be welcome to sleep in the forge carriage, even if it was big enough, so he should start looking for a hotel now that he had his wages. There was an inn nearby, but it was all marble walls, with guards at the doors in fancy armor and high-leveled skill gems. That looked far too expensive for his wallet. "Hey Tom, Is there an inn here that I might actually be able to afford? Dominic asked as he made sure he hadn't left anything in the other man's forge. That's the only one in town with an open room. I was gonna stay there if you lot got delayed for the night. You're welcome to put up a hammock on the far side if you like, but I will warn you that I snore. But if you can catch her, I think that our gunner Bella has a friend here in town, and she will likely be staying over there. You might be able to get a couch with them. The farmers are always happy to have a Real Smith stay over for a few hours' work, he suggested. The gunner was still laughing with the ranger up near the front of the convoy as the locals unloaded the cargo. The guards' jobs weren't finished until the cargo was unloaded and paid for, while the smith was on duty until the carriages were fixed and good to go again. They were lucky and didn't take much, if any, damage this time, so the boss hadn't requested anything of him after they arrived. He had just paid and left him with Tom, who was nursing his aching bones after being healed of his injuries. Dominic waved goodbye to the smith and hopped down from the oversized carriage with a shiver as he adjusted to the lack of heat from the forge. Bella, was it? I'm Dominic, the smith for the trip. Tom said that you might know a spot that I could rent a bed for a few nights. Somewhere more reasonable than that gaudy inn. Dominic asked as he approached the guards. The gunner pulled her hood back, revealing a mass of ginger-orange curls and an engagement ring on her hand, then smiled at him. A smith and a caster? Yeah, I suppose that I might be able to find a room for you. I might even be able to find a hunting party for you, if you would like to join us on a quest. You see, I've got my gunner skill gem up to level 4 and halfway to level 5 where I will get a pay increase, so I'm looking to head out of town for the week that the caravan is here and try to get some experience in. What do you say, you join me and my friend? She asked. Well, I know that you're good, but who is your friend? The ranger you've been flirting with? Dominic asked. Oh no, he's just a good driver. We would make lousy party members. You'll like Wiz, he's a crusader, so he can double as our group's healer and our main tank. He's already got his holy stone to level 7, so he wouldn't normally go with a pair like us, but he's good-hearted, and the goblins have become a problem for his farm. Bella explained, using hand gestures to emphasize her points. One of the other guards chuckled at her animated response, then smiled at Dominic. Normally, I would caution against 2 kids in love and a half-grown smith going out to fight goblins together. But Wiz doesn't count. That's not a kid. That's a pit bull in a kilt with a face to match. He laughed. Bella smacked him on the arm. Don't let him hear you say that, or he will beat you again. The clock on the nearby hotel chimed 6 o'clock, and the group began to break up their meetings to start cooking dinner. The caravan leader provided the supplies for meals as part of the deal, and technically, they were all still employees for the rest of the day. So Dominic sat down next to Bella and helped her chop potatoes for the evening meal. The stew was simple, but that was normal for traveling groups everywhere that Dominic had passed through since his hometown had been destroyed. Only certain foods traveled well, and it was best to pick the ones that were cheap and plentiful. In this case, cured rabbit, potatoes, and beans that Dominic wasn't certain were going to be soft by the time that the meal was ready. It seemed that the caravan guards knew what they were doing though, and after half an hour, the beans were splitting as he stirred the stew, and the handful of premixed spices that one of the others had added was smelling delicious. Even Tom managed to make his way out of bed to come for dinner, drawn by the smell of the stew pot as the last of the goods were cleared out of the carriages. Dominic filled himself a bowl and then helped serve the others, dishing out stew as fast as they could hold out their bowls. The pot was huge, and Dominic wondered if the plan was to have leftovers so they didn't need to cook for the next day or two. But as he served, more people started to arrive. They were the warehouse workers who had moved the goods, along with a few downtrodden locals who looked like they could use a good meal. The boss gestured for them to keep serving, right until the pot was empty. The number of happy locals made Dominic realize that he had overlooked one of the most important parts of being a merchant: public relations. If the people didn't like you, it cost more to get unloaded, it got harder to sell your goods, and you didn't get as good of prices for them when you did sell them. It was getting later in the evening when the meal was finished, and Bella pulled Dominic to his feet. We need to get going. They closed the gate in an hour, and Wiz lives outside the town walls on a farm. It's only a few minutes from the gate. We will make it there well before dark. the surprisingly muscular mystic gunner declared. All right, I'm with you. There is no need to panic. We're only a few minutes from the gates. Dominic agreed. They rushed through the crowded streets, earning amused glances from the locals, who assumed they were off to some shop or another before everything closed for the night. The village didn't keep lanterns lit during the evening, so other than a few taverns, the villagers mostly closed for business at dusk, using the closing of the gates as their last call for customers. Chapter 26 Whiz. 15 minutes later, the duo found themselves in front of a small whitewashed farmhouse, with chickens in the yard, pigs out back, and one big shaggy dog on the porch. It was the perfect picture of farm life, and to Dominic, who was used to a culture that was a mix of technomagic or sorcery-infused everything, it was like someone had made a rustic postcard reel. As they approached, the door swung open with a bang, and a massive man in a simple tartan kilt, with his muscular chest bare, came running out with his arms spread. Bella, it is so good to see you again. I was just telling Mother that we should come looking for you tomorrow. I was sure that it was your caravan that we saw charge through the battle this afternoon. Was anyone hurt? How is your gear holding up? He asked in a rapid-fire barrage that even Bella's guns would struggle to keep up with. His youthful eagerness was at complete odds with his massive body. It was rather cute how happy he was to see her home safely. Whiz, we're fine. Better than fine, since Dominic here spent the whole trip fixing our gear instead of pretending that he was too busy. He's agreed to come along with us to hunt goblins, and he's a caster as well as a blacksmith. Bella explained. An older man's head stuck out of the window at the word blacksmith. Did I hear that right? Little Bella brought us a smith? An actual proper smith, not some hack from the farrier that doesn't even have the skill. The older man asked. Dominic smiled at who he assumed was Wiz's father. Yes, I'm a proper smith, though I'm still a newer apprentice. This is my first trip out of the forge, and that's only because Bella's team was short of a smith to fix the vehicles if they were attacked. His face lit up with joy at the news. Good. Perhaps you can fix this for me. He gestured to something inside, and Bella motioned for him to go ahead while she caught up with Wiz. Good to meet you, you can call me Terry, and over here is my wife June. Now, we had a minor incident a few weeks back, and I don't know how to fix it myself, but I'm betting that you do, he explained with a gesture toward a sword on the table, broken into 3 parts. It had been a common-grade magical weapon, but not a great one. Now, it was scrap iron, and Dominic wasn't sure how to tell him that you couldn't just fix a magical sword that badly damaged. Well, I don't think that I can fix that at my level of skill, but perhaps I could use the material to make up a new blade for you? It looks like it was made of decent iron, he suggested. It was made by the journeyman in town, and it was my son's favorite blade, until it suffered a minor incident with the flooring. Dominic gave him a confused look, and the man looked sheepish. Well, you see, I didn't have a tool narrow enough to pull up that old floorboard and you used a sword as a pry bar instead of letting the board keep squeaking? You're lucky you're his father. Dominic laughed. Can you make him another blade? I know that most apprentices don't learn weapon making, but if you can make the raw material into something to get through until he can get another suitable weapon drop, I would be in your debt. Dominic smiled at the concerned father, who had made a massive mistake with his overgrown son's prized weapon. I come from a toolmaker's forge. I can rebuild a sword easily enough, and if he has a monster core, I might even be able to bring back a bit of its magic. Dominic agreed. Well, I've got a pile of coal out back if you've got a travel forge. That should be enough to get you started, I hope. Terry led him to the back of the house in the fading light, and into a small shed full of crudely made farm tools, with a pile of coal and a crude forge. That would be where he repaired his tools, but going by the quality of tools on the farm, it was clear that he didn't have much of a clue what he was doing, and just did his best to keep the farm running without burning through what little money they had. Your forge will work well enough if I use the bellows from my travel forge to get the heat up. Let the others know that I'm out back, and I will get to work so that I can have this done by midnight. Dominic agreed as he inspected the forge room. All right, they'll be a bit anyhow. It usually takes them hours to talk when Bella comes back home for a visit. Terry agreed. Are they related? Dominic asked. No, she grew up on the next farm over, before her pa passed on with a bad fever. That's when she went to the city and learned them fancy pistol tricks, you see. But our Wiz is taken with her, and we're hoping for a spring wedding. All right, I'll learn the story from her in the morning. Unless you want to give me a hand with the bellows, I think I'm good to go. The older man laughed and tossed a bit of coal into the forge, then lit it with fire magic and kindling from a basket that looked like it had seen many years of use. I can get the forge going well enough. I might not be good for much, but I'm good for that. Dominic looked at him more closely and noticed that Terry's trade skill core was for a farmer, but he didn't see how that related to having fire magic, unless it was just enough to get the hearth and forge lit. He was good at it, pumping the bellows with a smooth rhythm born of practice, which got the metal heated and glowing in no time at all. I hope things get better soon. There's been a lot of talk about something riling up the goblins lately. They've been attacking everywhere, and they're far more organized than they should be. I reckon that the town will set a bounty on them soon, so keep a left ear from them when you go hunting. He explained as Dominic pounded the metal back into one block and tossed it back into the forge to heat. There are problems with the goblins closer to the city as well. Do you think that there is something else behind them? I had always thought that goblins weren't all that bright. Dominic asked. Might be, but the hobgoblins are smarter, and if they've got shamans or, deities forbid, a lord, then they could be a real nuisance. Dominic nodded. The goblin shamans were trouble. They've got both hobgoblins and shamans. I've seen both this week. Hopefully, there isn't anything worse. Chapter 27 Weaponsmith. Dominic and Terry talked for hours about the trials and tribulations of being a small-town farmer, and Dominic even found time to fix a few of his tools while the sword steel was refined and folded in preparation to make a new blade. Wiz was huge, over 190 centimeters tall, though neither of his parents were particularly large people, so it would be best to craft him a longer and wider blade than the original sword had been. It would fit his stature better, and even if he fought with a shield, it would still be comfortable to wield one-handed. Terry looked concerned as Dominic pounded out the rough shape of the blade, but as it began to take shape, he looked more impressed than any customer that Dominic had dealt with in the past. So far, the weapon wasn't even magical, but he was still glowing with joy that the damaged blade would be repaired to such a standard. Wiz and Bella came in just as Dominic was starting to hammer the shape of the grip, and gasped in shock at the sight in front of them. You didn't say that you were a weaponsmith. Bella gasped. I'm not. I'm a toolsmith. I just happen to know a few things about weapons for those who know not to mention it again. Dad said that you needed a monster core to try to reactivate the magic in the steel. Does it matter what it came from? Wiz asked. Well, there are no guarantees that it will work, so don't go wasting something you need. But I think I can get some magic out of this blade. Dominic agreed. There was no need to tell them that he knew a forge rune to guarantee that he would get an effect, and he could always chase them out of the forge as he worked. It would be excellent practice for his trade skill core, and it would buy a lot of goodwill from the big crusader. You know you have dragon fire, a voice whispered in his head. Dominic tried to ignore it so he wasn't distracted from his work. You don't have to show them the forge rune if you use dragon fire, the voice insisted. And how would that help? Dominic snarkily replied to the voice, wondering if he was going insane. Dragon fire has magic. Use it in place of the rune. The voice insisted. Fine. But if this fails, it's on you. How he would hold a voice in his head liable for his failure was a mystery, even to himself. But it had seemed like the right thing to say. While Dominic was talking to himself, or rather the voices in his head, Wiz had taken out a goblin shaman core and placed it by the forge. Will that do? He asked. It will be perfect. Now I just need to grind it while this heats, and we will be ready to start. The process is a bit unique, and I'm not sure that anyone else would do it this way, but it should awaken some magic in the steel. Dominic offered, just in case the process didn't work. Even if it's not a magical weapon, I can already tell that the blade is much more durable than the original ever was. Goblin-dropped blades tend to be trash for durability, even if they have decent magic. Wiz replied. With the core ground, Dominic pulled the blade from the forge and sprinkled the dust over both sides of the blade, letting the heat stick it to the surface, then stepped outside and unleashed dragon flame on the blade, lighting it up white-hot and merging the core dust into the surface. Tiny words appeared on the blacksmithing trade skill gem. Creation complete. Random dragon magic effect Blood Boil causes additional burning damage on hit. Uncommon magical item. Blade of Blood Boil, created at Apprentice Level 2. The blade was jet black, with a red hilt that seemed to shine a bit in the dim light. Dominic admired it for a moment, then handed it to Wiz. How does that feel in your hand? Came out really well, and the dragon fire seems to have really brought the steel to life. I tried to make it a bit larger than average, since you're larger than average, to give you more range. He explained. This is beautiful. I don't think I've ever seen a blade of this quality before, much less actually held one. Can you always make this quality of weapons? Wiz asked. Magical quality? Unlikely. It's a somewhat random effect from the dragon fire. I have no idea what it will create next time. But the blade itself is something that I can make given enough time. He reluctantly agreed. Well, then I will have to make sure that nobody else gets their hands on it to inspect it, because any of the merchants would be able to tell who made it. Wiz explained, then immediately had the blade taken from him by Bella, who was staring at it in awe. It really does have power. A crafted, uncommon magical blade. You know, even if you haven't made it to journeyman blacksmith, you could make a fortune at the magical item shops with this sort of craftsmanship. Bella gushed, before having the blade stolen back from her. While making money was always a goal for anyone who had nothing, that wasn't Dominic's goal. Getting into the palace forges, where he could be around people with real influence, was more important to him right now. Wealth and fame could come later. Are you trying to get him kidnapped? You know how those shops are. If they see a chance to make a gold, they will do anything to get it. Selling crafted items would just draw their attention to Dominic, and he's only a new apprentice right now. Was reminded his gun-slinging fiancé. Right, I forgot about that. But that thing is worth some serious money. Like new farm money. Well, maybe not a good farm, but you get my point. At this level of enhancement, Pops had said that it should sell for about 4,000 silver as an uncommon blade, so 400 small gold coins. That would definitely buy a small house in town, or a bit of bad farmland, which was generally more valuable and desirable than a shack in the city. Well, at least we can go hunting now that our team leader has his sword back. Is there any other gear that needs to be fixed? Or can we call it a night? It got late before I even noticed. Dominic asked. Get some sleep. We will head out first thing in the morning after breakfast. Wiz agreed, and Dominic turned to the forge shack. Where are you going? The big woman asked. It's warm in there. I've gotten used to sleeping over the forge. Dominic laughed. There's no room for a bed in there. I'll get you an extra blanket. But the air shouldn't be too cold overnight with so many of us in the house. Terry joked with a gesture toward the small, two-bedroom farmhouse. Chapter 28, It's Warm in the Forge. He was wrong. When Dominic woke up on the thin mattress spread out on the floor in the living room, he was freezing. Nobody else seemed to be cold, and Wiz's mother had the window open in the kitchen as she cooked breakfast for everyone, so it had to be an issue of perception. I really need to get used to sleeping somewhere other than over the forge, Dominic mumbled as he got to his feet and brushed his hands through his blonde hair. It was getting rather long now, and he should probably cut it soon. I'm sure you'll adapt quick enough once you're away from the city for a bit, but there should be food. Wiz's mom is a fantastic cook, Bella assured him. Wiz nodded in agreement, and smoothed his tunic shirt before gliding into the kitchen with surprising grace for his size. While they ate, Wiz outlined the plan for the day. There have been numerous attacks near the tree line coming from Signia City, but on the other sides of town, the attacks have been mostly in the forest. I have a theory that is because the goblins are avoiding camping near the main road and can only catch the convoys when they get close. It's not perfect, but I think that if we go along here, we should find some smaller groups that will be easier to clear out. There is a guard patrol going to the same region today, so we will stay near them and pick up what we can for kills. 3 of us isn't really enough, no matter how high our individual damage output is, so staying near the patrol is for our safety. The big crusader explained. I won't disagree with that. My first trip out was with 24 students, and it was a disaster. Even a few more competent people around can make a big difference. Dominic agreed. Bella gave him a suspicious look. 24 students? That wouldn't be the students who went out with the Duke's son and the princess, would it? Dominic sighed. I didn't realize that the fiasco was public knowledge. Bella shook her head. Not quite public knowledge. My friend in the city is obsessed with the royal family, and when she heard that the youngest princess had brought a young male friend with her to the dinner, she immediately started looking into it so she could plan on how to have it be her next time. Wiz laughed. And what did she say when she found out that she would have to go out into the wilderness with the paladin princess and risk her life twice? I know who Bella is talking about, and she's definitely not the type. Dominic looked at the big crusader. Seriously? Does everyone know? Wiz shrugged. Bella told me the story last night. I just had to connect the dots when I found out it was you. Then he got to his feet and carefully equipped a ragged set of plate armor over a rough leather base, while Dominic patiently waited to finish equipping the workwear of a seasoned warrior. It looked sturdy enough but very crude and poorly made. Dominic wouldn't say anything, but the next time was asked for that to be repaired, he would try to improve it at least a little bit. Not out of some sense of chivalry. Simply because that crude workmanship was painful to look at. The shield was likewise very crude, and Dominic realized why. They were both common-grade magical items that had been obtained from killing the goblins. The crude appearance and poor workmanship was a common theme to all items gained from the goblins, even though the actual defense that it provided was still better than most non-magical items. When he got back to Signia City, Dominic hoped that he would be able to get another forge rune out of Pops, one for defense, so that he could create magical items without the need for the secret dragonfire trick that he had just learned from the voices in his head. Come to think of it, he should really be more freaked out about that. Hearing voices in your head was not normal. Hearing voices that gave you accurate magical crafting advice went way beyond not normal. In fact, the more he thought about it, the less plausible it seemed. And now the voices were laughing at him. Well, it wasn't like it was the first time that he had heard the voices. They had just been silent for a while now, since he entered Signia City, come to think of it. We should get going, or we're not going to catch up to the guard patrol, he suggested, hoping to change the topic away from his dinner with the princesses. You're right, we need to go. Just know that this topic is not over. We need to know everything. Bella informed him as she checked her gear for the day. She had chosen cloth pants and shirt with a leather jacket, none of which were going to be great for armor value, as they weren't magical in any way, but they gave her great mobility to shoot. They were definitely going to need some more close combat fighters. Wiz led them out to the road and then stopped with a smile on his face, looking back toward the city. What's up, Wiz? Bella asked. Garrison Commander Asher is in the group today, he replied without looking back. How he knew that, Dominic didn't know, but seconds later, he saw the banner of the guard patrol over the fences, with an additional banner that must be the mark of the garrison commander. Wiz had simply seen them first because he could see over the fences and hedgerows. The column marched right up to them without slowing, but Dominic didn't miss the smile on the commander's face when he saw was waiting for him, or the curious looks the other guards were giving the trio. They fell in beside the column, and the commander raised his voice to give an order. These young adventurers will be joining us on our hunt today. Include them in one of our teams when we split to hunt for the goblins. I've got the feeling that today is the day, he announced. Dominic ignored the fact that the commander hadn't even questioned what their skill set might be, and looked at the soldier beside him, who whispered an answer as he marched along in the line. The commander already knows both of them well enough. He believes that someone is guiding the goblins. The attacks don't make sense as goblin tactics. If there really is a champion of some sort among the goblins, he intends to be the one to find proof of it and stamp out the threat before it gets worse. The guard quietly informed Dominic, with a determined look that said he agreed with the sentiment. I think he's right. I just don't know if we're going to find it here, or if the answer is in some other village's territory. Dominic whispered back, earning himself a smile from the guard. We will see, but I heard that whoever finds it will get a special reward from the royal family. Maybe even a promotion to officer or a titled acreage. The The guard's eyes shone with eagerness at that. Becoming a baronet through acts of valor was rare, but it was one of the few ways that anyone could ascend into the nobility. Even if the farm barely earned a living, or the baronet leased it out to sharecroppers, they would ascend into a new tier of society. The commander raised his voice again as they got near the trees. "We're in luck, gentlemen. Fresh footprints. Who is taking the Crusader and his friends into their team?" he called. "Team 1 could use the ranged firepower." "No worries, Commander. We will take good care of your whiz," the man beside Dominic called back, while the rest of his team tried not to chuckle at the commander's look of sheepish annoyance. Dominic didn't quite understand who he thought that he was fooling. Even he could tell that the commander was trying to recruit the big Crusader. Chapter 29: Village Guards and Crusaders. The group of guardsmen was made up almost entirely of warrior skill gem-equipped soldiers with combat gems and spell stones around level 5, but with one cleric among them for healing. Each additional level applied to a spell stone would increase the effect of the magic by somewhere between 20 and 25% compared to a level 1 magical skill. So, for the common masses, 1 or 2 extra levels on a primary attack gem was a huge difference. The addition of the 3 adventurers gave them a slightly stronger lead fighter, as well as a higher damage ranged fighter and Dominic, whose abilities none of them really understood. They would find out soon enough when they got into a fight, but with crafters it could be hit or miss what actual combat abilities they had when they were still young. But there was one thing that they all knew. Dominic was the blacksmith that came in with the caravan last night, and if you got in good with an apprentice blacksmith, you could save a fortune on repairs and new equipment in the long term. The village had multiple smithy forges, most of which dealt with vehicle repairs and magitech items. Ones that were willing to take the drudgery of repairing armor and properly sharpening weapons were much harder to find, and most of the guardsmen either did it themselves if they could, or took it to the toolmaker. So, they wouldn't turn down his help, despite the fact that he was only a level 2 blacksmith apprentice. As an innate magic user, that mattered less than a level 2 enhanced frontline warrior, who would take much more damage and be less able to block attacks. A lower-level caster simply didn't do as much damage. But most goblins died against any magical attack, so it wasn't as much of an issue. The guards let Wiz lead the team into the trees, following the footprints that the garrison commander had found. They didn't follow the main group, instead Wiz led them down a side path to see where the goblins had branched off to. If it was not a diversion, it would likely be an ambush site, or a hunting camp where they were collecting food. Both were important targets to eliminate, and with 4 guards, a cleric and Dominic's group, they shouldn't have too many problems taking out an ambush team. The signs of movement through the forest became more and more clear the further that they went into the trees, and before long they could hear goblins talking, and the crackle of a campfire. Wiz looked back at the team and gave them a series of hand signals to close in tight on his shoulders when he charged, and to keep 2 of the warriors back to prevent the goblins from surrounding the ranged attackers. Bella carefully moved forward until she could see the camp, and then climbed up into a tree to give herself a better firing line, while Dominic moved behind the cleric so that if anything came from the back, the healer wasn't the first one to take the attack. The goblin camp was similar in size to the group that ambushed the convoy, about 40 goblins in total, but this time they didn't need to guard a set of steam carriages full of valuable trade goods, and they could just fight. The team didn't make a sound as they charged into the goblin camp until they activated their first skills. For Wiz, that was Consecration and Area Damage ability, while for the warriors it was Cleave, which sent out an energy blade in an arc that followed the path of their weapon for a few meters in front of them. The skills themselves didn't make any noise, but the flashes of light as the gems activated and the sound of wounded and dying goblins were unmistakable. The skills cut a swathe through the goblins and forced them to regroup if they wanted to survive. Bella began to fire from her perch in the trees, and Dominic aimed arcane blasts between the warriors to pick off the goblins who tried to circle around them. Every goblin that he got a clear view of got a matching spell to the face, dropping the small green monsters into a growing pile of corpses at the edge of the semicircle of melee fighters. "How is your mana holding up?" the cleric asked as Dominic used 2 arcane blasts in rapid succession. "It's good. I get a bit of regeneration on kill," he replied, to hide the fact that his primary attack spell didn't actually use any internally stored mana. That was much too strange to explain to others, and far too easy to exploit if they knew about it and wanted to make him do all the work. Mana on kill is a fantastic gem bonus. But it's a bit savage for a smith, isn't it? The cleric asked a bit dubiously. Fighting is fighting, and smithing is smithing. It's better to keep the two separate in your mind. But there are more advantages to having combat bonuses than just a bit of mana regeneration. Besides, the goblins have materials that I need. Dominic replied with his best gentle smile to set the cleric's mind at ease. While they were joking, Dominic took out 3 more goblins who had tried to encircle their position, keeping the pressure off the guards on their flanks, and allowing Bella more time to reload. She wasn't wasting ammunition on grand volleys like she had when they burst through the fight yesterday. Instead, she was picking them off one at a time, carefully placing her shots so that the fight didn't cost her more than it earned. The group began to push forward as the goblins were cleared from the camp, and the stragglers started to run, which made Bella jump down from her spot in the tree and jog over to the group past the piles of corpses. Looting this is going to suck. Sure, the cores go straight to your storage, but the bounty on goblins demands a left ear. She muttered to Dominic under her breath. It was the only sure way to prove that you had really done the job, and someone would notice pretty quickly if there was a group of goblins running around without one ear. The forest around them fell silent, marking the last of the visible goblins' deaths. But Dominic didn't relax just yet. He had seen how sneaky they could be with their underground hiding spots. The guards had also been informed of the tricks they were playing near the capital, and the attempt to ambush the princess during her hunting trip. So, each destroyed hut was checked while the bodies were stripped of any spare weapons and their ears, a task that the guards were kind enough to take on themselves. Did anyone get anything good from the drops? The team leader asked, checking faces to see if any of his men were hiding something from him. As city guards, the drops belonged to the town, and the guards got a portion of the revenue when they were sold. It was one of the ways that the council kept everything funded and running as smoothly as possible. Dominic sorted through his drops. Copper daggers, mana cores, filthy cloth, a few bags of coins, a common magic dagger, and finally one blue-colored scroll caught his attention. He had gotten a rare drop. Mana revolver pattern. According to the introduction at the top of the scroll, that should be usable by those with blacksmith, gunsmith, and artificer skills. Dominic quickly read the next paragraph. Creates a revolver that may be reloaded for 6 mana. Damage determined on creation. It was beautiful, everything that a weaponsmith could ever hope for. Well, it was still a revolver, which Dominic didn't really know how to use, but still, it was an actual rare recipe drop. Maybe in this life, fate really did favor him. Pops had been adamant that the masters were hiding away all the good recipes. But perhaps that also worked the other way. Those who got the good recipes became master smiths. Chapter 30 Goblin Fashion. I got a magic dagger, Dominic offered while taking it out of his storage cube to show the team leader. Not bad. We can always use more magical weapons. How do you feel about a trade? The team leader asked. A trade? Yeah, I got an armor drop, but it is only really good for ladies or magic types. It's also a common magic item, so the values are equivalent, but I see that you're using ordinary armor with an excellent magical dagger and sword. He offered. I would feel better with some magic armor, even if the drops from the goblins tend to look pretty shabby. Dominic chuckled as he handed him the dagger. You're right about that. The monster blessing does have a strange sense of aesthetics when it comes to goblin-dropped loot. If we were a bit higher level, we could head out into the hills and join the guards there, but level 10 on both your primary attack and defense gems is the minimum, since they get level 12 and 15 ogre clans. You might be fast enough to run off, but at our level as warriors, we would just get squished. One of the guards laughed. Dominic smiled at them and shrugged. It's a gift. Unlike the warriors who solve everything with brute strength, I'm much happier when things die way over there. The guard laughed as he passed over the pile of cloth, which Dominic examined carefully to see if it was going to be worth equipping. The guard had said it was mostly for women and mages, which was a touch insulting. But he was a magic user from their point of view. What he got was a somewhat tattered black mage robe that could be worn over his existing leather pants, decorated with simple magical runes along the edges, and a simple cloth harness to carry potions and weapons on, Should you prefer not to keep them in storage? Paired with his long leather coat and the brass cog work down the sleeves, he actually looked like a normal traveling mage, and he no longer needed to keep the stifling coat closed to keep the battered state of his combat gear from embarrassing him in public. The mage robes looked like they were in rough shape, but they were magical, and that made them immediately better fashion than what he had in the eyes of the guards and most others. I like it. It's comfortable, not too heavy, not too breezy. Plus, it's got some decent armor increase magic on it. Dominic informed them with a smile. Not a lot of increase, but as a common grade magical item, that was to be expected. Still, it was better than what he had, and now he was more comfortable in the summer heat. Alright, let's get a move on. If there's one raiding camp, there's got to be more. How is everyone on mana and healing? Was called out to the group. We're all good when the cleric is boss man. One of the guards called back. Wiz's attention turned to the cleric, whose weathered face wrinkled as he smiled back at him. I'm back over 3/4 of my mana. That fight went remarkably smoothly with 2 extra ranged attackers. Lead the way, and let's try to create an incident-free day for the caravans. Was picked up on the trails of more goblins right from the edge of the camp, and led the group further into the woods, back toward the city. The guards weren't as loud as Dominic had expected, given their heavy armor, and it was only a few minutes before the sound of combat alerted the group that there was an attack on the road. Wiz and the guard team moved with well-practiced efficiency, nearly leaving Dominic and Bella behind as they shifted position to rush forward. The 2 ranged fighters ran along behind the group, keeping the cleric safely in the middle of the formation while the warriors crashed into the goblins' backs. Dominic picked off the goblins who were going for the caravan instead of the guards, while Bella targeted any spot where the goblins outnumbered the defenders. With the additional forces, the fight was over in seconds. The goblins didn't have the tactical knowledge to fight while surrounded, and once their backs were exposed, it was a simple matter to dispose of them. The cleric and Wiz both moved through the caravan guards as the last of the goblins were eliminated, healing the injured and making sure that the vehicles would be able to go on. This caravan was a bit different from the one that Dominic had been employed by. They didn't use the steam trucks. They used a row of Magitech steam-powered tractors, each pulling a pair of trailers. The setup held a remarkable amount of cargo, but looking at the design, it was much better suited to good roads or soft fields than the bumpy and rutted back roads to the village. Once the trailers were stuck in the mud, even the steel spikes of the tractor wheels would struggle to pull them out, he assumed. But the merchants looked to be fairly well off, and the guard team was higher level, so maybe he was wrong, and those tractors were more capable than he gave them credit for. The caravan leader bowed to Wiz and the team leader. Thanks for your assistance. The trucks are almost good to go. Just a few repairs to make and we will be on our way. One of the pushrods was damaged in the attack. We just need to get it back on, and that's the worst of it. Dominic jogged over to where an aging dwarf was glaring at the mangled metal beam and the snapped bolt that should have held it to the input shaft for the axle. This was a great chance to learn a bit more about vehicle repair, which seemed to be a pretty lucrative trade for a traveling blacksmith. Need a hand? He asked. You know anything about steel? The dwarf retorted, inspecting Dominic through a brass-framed monocle. Enough to know that's not made of steel, and that it will soften up real nice in my travel forge if you've got a good oil to temper it back up to standards in afterwards. Dominic replied. Thorin, son of Domar, Thane of Graska. The dwarf introduced himself, extending his hand for a handshake. Dominic Wavemates, apprentice of Pops, from Signia City. He replied. The dwarf burst into laughter, then looked at his serious expression and began to laugh even harder. Boy, I wouldn't go telling people that if I were you. They'll put you right to work when they find out. Thorin chortled. He pointed back to the middle of the caravan, the usual spot for the caravan's smithy carriage, and then continued. Get that arm pulled, and I'll get the forge ready. I've got a spare spindle bolt, so we won't need to make one of them today. Dominic double-checked that the team wasn't going to leave him behind, but it looked like the caravan guards were taking out the soup pots, so they should have an hour to get the tractors in working order before the food was ready. Normally, they wouldn't cook while they were on the road. They would eat something cold and simple, but as they weren't going anywhere anyhow, there was no harm in it, other than the smell of cooking food. One swat with the hammer and chisel had the nut loosened on the front of the shaft, and then Dominic realized that he was going to have a small problem. The beam weighed well over 60 kilos, and he could barely carry the weight in both arms, but to get it repaired, he would have to lift it into the forge trailer. It was a bit of a depressing reminder that his body was still in the growth phase, even after his 20th birthday, but he wasn't going to let that get him down. Given time, he would get his strength up to a more reasonable standard. "I don't suppose I can borrow one of you fine gentlemen for a moment. This thing is surprisingly heavy," he asked with a sigh. "Of course. Jack, John, grab an end and bring that beam to Thorin. He should have the forge hot by now," the caravan boss shouted to a pair of his larger members. Dominic gave one last swing of the hammer to knock the damaged spindle bolt out of its hole, and then followed them to the forge. A bit of observation would go a long way to teaching him about how the experienced dwarves would fix a bend like that without weakening the metal. Chapter 31. Repair Assistant. The guards took the large bronze pushrod to Thorin's forge, where the dwarf had a pair of sawhorses set up, along with what looked like a hydraulic jack on rollers. Dominic had never seen anything like it before, but after inspecting it for a second, he could understand what the dwarf was thinking. Once the shaft was placed over the fire to heat, the dwarf took out a box full of rollers and a gear-driven wheel that would roll the whole contraption down the length of the shaft, bending it back into shape as the contraption passed down the length. That was the real advantage of being a full-time smith for a merchant. You could make up specialty tools like this and jigs for commonly broken parts that the vehicles used. It was so much more efficient than working from a travel forge with makeshift stands and a string line to tell you when the rod was actually straight. Dominic hopped up and worked the bellows on the forge, keeping the heat up as the dwarf prepared everything for the task at hand. Fortunately, his forge was an enchanted one, and the thick bronze was glowing hot in a matter of minutes, ready to be transferred. 1, 2, 3, lift. There we go, just settle it in the rack and I will get the roll press set up. Have you ever used one? I know Pops is old school and doesn't use jigs and cheats to make his tools, Thorin asked. Nope, but I get the concept. With the eyes of the shaft in the jig to keep the length right, you'll roll it back to shape. Dominic replied. Close. You will be the one to roll it straight, and I will keep the heat on it and hammer out the stress points so we don't have to put as much work into getting it finished. That was something that Dominic hadn't practiced at all, and it was a fine art form to even recognize where the stress points were. But as he started to roll down the pushrod, adjusting the pressure with one hand while he moved the gears driving the rollers with the other, Thorin's tapping and the resultant change in the tone when he got to a stress point told him that it was not going to be a short process. The first pass straightened the shaft close to straight, and in an emergency they would have likely called it good and slapped it back on. But they had some time and the forge was hot, so they got it glowing again and made another pass, then another to make it perfectly smooth, and to give Thorin a chance to work out a few more stress points. Then he nodded happily at their handiwork and cast a spell on the bronze, cooling it instantly. Journeyman blacksmiths have some advantages, especially dwarves. I don't need a bucket of oil to temper my creations. He laughed at Dominic's confused look. Unfair advantage, he muttered, while the dwarf continued to laugh. Here, install that spindle, and I'll call the boys to bring over the shaft. Just don't forget the washers when you tighten the nuts. Thorin reminded him. A quick swat with the hammer set the new spindle bolt in place, and the guards brought over the beam with shocked looks on their faces. How did you do that? One of them asked. Do what? I just worked the roller. Thorin did the hard parts. Dominic replied. Yeah, that part. How did you complete a task without getting yelled at? Dominic shrugged. Just work the roller properly, and you don't get yelled at. Thorin's laughter rang through the woods. See, boys, the sorcerer gets it. If you could follow directions, you too could complete a simple task without getting yelled at. The fact that none of them had any blacksmithing skills meant that none of them knew when to adjust the pressure or which way, so of course they would mess it up every time. Any other vehicles too damaged to travel? Dominic asked after he tightened the last nut and checked his work. Nope, we're all up and running. Come and grab something to eat, and then I think your team wants to be on their way again. The guard informed him with a friendly pat on the back. One bowl of stew and a hard bread loaf later, They were ready to head back into the woods, looking for signs of more goblins. Wiz stood to address the team. "All right, listen up." The caravan boss said that the group they were attacked by had one much larger goblin, nearly hobgoblin-sized, but wearing armor and jewels. That's not normal goblin behavior. They won't allow any of their tribe members to try to look more impressive than the others. So it has to be some sort of leader to the group, maybe even a goblin lord. If there is a goblin lord, it means they're getting organized, and that we will be facing much more dangerous attacks along the road over the next few weeks. So I want to try to find where it went. If we find more goblins, that's great. But if we can find a lord, or even more shamans, the town will be grateful for our efforts. Grateful didn't pay extra, but it would earn them some goodwill, and goodwill went a long way when you needed something in the future. Things that weren't for sale to outsiders would become available to those with a good reputation, and even the farmer stalls would get you a better price on provisions if you had a reputation for keeping goblins and other dangers away from their farms. The guards' wages weren't high, but they always ate decently, thanks to the gratitude of the farmers. "All right, let's go find this tacky goblin." "How is your ammunition doing, Bella?" Dominic replied. "I'm still good. I stocked enough for a month of hunting before I have to go back to the city to get my ammunition refilled. There isn't anyone in town that sells it at a reasonable price." The gunslinger replied. "We're all good on arrows as well. No worries, little smith. You can just look after our healer, and we will take care of the rest." The guard captain laughed. The cleric flipped him off for suggesting a boy who looked half his age and magical ability should guard him. But the boss wasn't wrong. He didn't have much for combat skills. Chapter 32 Track the Goblin Lord. With their skilled tracker in the lead, the patrol headed out searching for the possible goblin lord. The guards were all understandably nervous to hear about the chance that the goblin attacks on their town were more organized than they had suspected, mixed with a sense of eagerness to find the truth and hopefully eliminate the threat before things got even worse for the village. The bonus pay for a confirmed goblin lord elimination would be enough to give them the easy life for a few months, and perhaps even buy a few things for the family that they had been waiting for the right time to fit into the budget. Every guard set aside a lot of their pay, just in case they didn't come home one day, but now and then they had to splurge on their family to keep things happy at home. For Wiz and Bella, it was somewhat the same. They didn't have a family of their own to take care of, but Wiz's family farm relied on the income that he brought in to keep them from struggling during the winter months. It was just part of living on a farm. Only the best years were really comfortable, and you had to save some of that in case the next year wasn't a good one. There are footprints headed back toward the city. Goblins with hobgoblins for sure. The prints are the same four-toed pattern, but too big for a regular goblin. The scout reported. "Perfect, we're on the right path. Can you tell how far ahead of us they are?" Wiz asked. "Not far. It looks like they're setting up for an ambush. The footprints keep splitting off like they're looking for something," he reported. "Or hiding their numbers," the guard captain added. That put everyone on edge. Hiding their numbers was unusual for goblins, but the hobgoblins were a bit smarter, and if the report was right and there was a lord, they might actually manage a proper ambush. "Everyone form up in the hostile territory pattern. I've got a bad feeling about this," was whispered a few seconds later. Everything was quiet around them. Too quiet. The guards fell into a circle around the ranged attackers and the cleric, the usual pattern for defense against goblins. Defending the ranged attackers meant that even after the goblins had engaged, they wouldn't be forced to stop shooting. The guards just had to trust their ranged support not to shoot them in the back. As long as that much trust existed, moving to this formation wouldn't reduce their damage output, even while it shrunk the size of their position. They followed the trail a little further, until the scout reported that there were convergent footprints. More goblins were joining the group and doing their best to step in the footprints of those who traveled before them. They weren't actually skilled at it, and the tracker picked it up right away, but most groups would have never noticed that the number of goblins was growing rapidly. "I say there are nearly 50 of them, with 5 hobgoblins. Are we ready for this?" the tracker asked. Wiz nodded. "Let's get this done." They moved past a group of trees, and the wind shifted, bringing the stench of goblin to them a full second before the screams of the attackers shattered the silence. It was more than enough time to get their defenses set, and the charging goblins were quickly mowed down by Bella's guns combined with Dominic firing off Arcane Blast as fast as he could. The goblins who were hanging back screamed in rage and joined the offensive as they realized their front ranks were dying. That brought out another dozen goblins, as well as 8 hobgoblins. They had estimated 5, but the guards could still deal with 8, as long as they didn't waste too much time fighting with the smaller ones. "Do we shift positions?" one of the guards asked. He was facing away from the hobgoblins, where the heaviest fighting would be, and where his blade would be most desperately needed. "Hold your formation. They will circle around us looking for a weak point," the guard commander ordered, keeping the soldiers in their circular grouping. Dominic went straight to hurling Arcane Blast at the hobgoblins, felling one with a lucky hit to the face, and severely injuring 2 more before the smaller goblins had even reached combat. "You get the big ones. I will help clear the front ranks," Bella shouted as she fired her pistols dry into the green tide, then rapidly reloaded. The hobgoblins were just as fast as Dominic remembered them, and it was a matter of seconds before they were crashing into the shields and blades of the guards, the perfect moment for Dominic to hit their exposed faces. But then they did the strangest thing. A shrill voice yelled something in the goblin language, and they all ducked their heads to tackle the guards instead of trying to fight them. That took half the guards off their feet and ruined any semblance of formation that the group had. Dominic managed to kill another, while Bella got 2, 1 with each pistol, but the smaller goblins were swarming out from behind the rocks and trees, not giving any time for the guards to get back to their feet. With a roar, Dominic unleashed his dragon flame into the densely packed group of goblins and across the backs of the surviving hobgoblins, roasting flesh from bone and making them rear up off the guards, who jumped on the opportunity to stab into their exposed chests. "That's the Lord. Drive them out of our formation and don't let him escape," the guard captain ordered. That was easier said than done. The hobgoblins might have been defeated, but there were still dozens of others between them and the goblin lord's position on a log overlooking the battle. The moment that he realized his side was losing, he would flee, and there would be nothing they could do to stop him. They didn't have the ranged firepower, but there was a chance that they wouldn't need it. He had perched himself on top of a fallen tree, and if someone could blast it out from underneath him, he would tumble down into the fight where the guards could get at him. The guards managed to get back to their feet, other than one with a broken leg that the cleric's flash of light healing ability wasn't enough to totally repair, reforming the circle to push the goblins back to a manageable distance with Dominic and Bella's firepower thinning their ranks. That was the moment Dominic was sure of it. The Lord was about to flee, so he threw an arcane blast at the rotted tree under his feet. But his aim was off, and the spell severed the Goblin Lord's leg at the ankle, sending him tumbling forward down the hill and right into Wiz, who grinned with delight as he lifted his blade and drove it down through the Goblin Lord's head. That was one loss too many for the rest of the goblins, and they fled, dropping their weapons and anything else that was slowing them down. "Who is too wounded to walk?" Wiz asked, starting the triage process for his limited number of healing spells. "I think it's just me, but once they splint my leg, I can hobble back with the group," the downed guardsman replied. Everyone else, except for Dominic, had various wounds all over their bodies, even Bella, who had only been up close to the fighting for a few seconds after the hobgoblins pushed through the line. But if anyone noticed that it was strange that the dragonkin wasn't injured, nobody said anything. Instead, they focused on taking out bandages to treat their own wounds first, before helping their comrades with the wounds they couldn't reach. "Get the ears and the Lord's whole head. Let's get out of here," the guard captain directed. That was the greatest thing that Dominic had heard all day. Chapter 33, Return to Eremos. The guards on duty were waiting at the town gates to welcome back the patrol when they returned, eager for news of how the hunt for the suspected Goblin Lord had gone. The merchant caravan had already reached them and passed on the news, as well as the fact that there was a team hunting the vile creature. "Did you find it? Was there really a lord?" the gate guard asked. "We did, and there is more news. Can you send a runner to tell the mayor we're headed his way?" the captain requested. That was news to Dominic as well. He hadn't mentioned anything except the death of the lord. So what was this extra news that he was so excited to tell the mayor? Did he maybe get a rare or valuable drop item? Wiz leaned over to whisper to Dominic as they walked. The mayor doesn't like finding things out secondhand, so if it's not relevant enough that it affects the mission, the scout teams go together to tell him about news and important events before the rest of the town finds out. The captain stopped at the entry to the mayor's house and knocked, then patiently waited until the door opened, and a harassed-looking clerk with thick spectacles perched on his oversized nose opened the thick wooden door. "Get in here already. We've heard that you were hunting a goblin lord. How did it go? Did you find out anything else?" the clerk asked. "Send them in here. Why are you making them tell the story twice?" a booming voice demanded from the other room. "Sorry, Mayor, sir," the clerk responded before ushering in the group. Nobody seemed to even notice the fact that one of them was still limping a little, even after another 2 heals by their cleric, or that there was filthy green goblin blood on all of them. The mayor and his staff had seen it so many times now that it barely even registered. "Well, get to it," the mayor demanded. The captain took out a piece of paper and handed it over with a grim look. "I got that off the Lord's corpse. It is a set of orders to attack the caravans coming to town, so we don't get nosy. I think everyone here understands what that means," he said with a sigh. "That the Goblin Lord wasn't in charge of anything but harassing our trade caravans. There's still something nastier than that, waiting for the city forces to show weakness while they are making plans." The mayor agreed with a deep frown. This wasn't something that would have changed anything about their mission. They were already headed back to town to inform them about what had happened. But it still struck Dominic as odd that the captain hadn't filled any of them in before they got to the office. Maybe that was just how things were done here, but it still seemed odd. As he considered the message from the Goblin Lord's body, the mayor began to move pieces around on a map that took up an entire table in his study, while tapping his fingers on the surface and frowning. It looked like a collection of reports of attacks and confirmed kills, almost all goblins from the greenstones he was using. "Did any of the guards get a lottery drop?" the mayor asked. The team all shook their heads. None of them had gotten anything good enough that it would be auctioned to the highest bidder, with the profits split between the lucky guardsmen and the guard as a whole. It was their way of making sure that those with great luck didn't hoard items they couldn't use. Letting wealthy merchants and nobles buy them made more sense, and kept everyone safer. "What about you 3? Did you get anything you'd like to auction? We can get you a good price for your items," the mayor asked. Dominic shook his head. "I did get a decent item, but it's a blacksmithing plan, and I'm a smith. I hope you understand." The mayor smiled. "Well, nobody would expect a tradesman to give up an item as valuable as a recipe or blueprint. I wish you luck with your crafting. We should be able to get you anything you need if the merchants in town are being difficult." Dominic smiled at him. He didn't seem as annoying as those nobles in the city were. Maybe his time in this village wouldn't be half bad. "I'll keep it in mind," he agreed. Wiz led them back toward the farm, where Dominic could see a whiff of smoke from the stove gently blowing in the breeze, and Wiz's father out in the fields working. He couldn't wait to get the forge fired up and start making the parts for the new mana revolver plans he had obtained. If he could actually make them on his own, it would be a huge bump of experience for his blacksmith skill core. Not only that, but being able to present one at the apprentice intake made by himself would likely put him well ahead of the average competitor. He had a decent number of goblin cores again, and he would be able to put them into improving his skill, but for now it would be better to hold off and gain through practical work instead of relying on the theoretical knowledge from the magic of the trade skill core. "I take it that you want to do some work before dinner?" Bella asked as they reached the farm. "If there is time, it would be great. I really want to try out this new plan, and if it works, we will be much safer from the goblins." Dominic agreed. The gunslinger knew the excited dragonkin wouldn't be easily dissuaded from his goals, and left him to his own devices while she followed was inside to clean up and help with dinner and the chores. In the forge, Dominic had a drop sheet out and was digging through the scrap items he had collected for any parts that might come in useful for his project. Here was a trigger, there was a spring, and a likely bit of steel that would only need a little work to reshape. The 2 hardest parts would be the precision fitting of the cylinder to hold the rounds perfectly in place, and the actual barrel of the revolver with rifling, which he didn't have a specialty tool for. Spring steel was the hardest part to make, but fortunately, he had plenty in his pile of pilfered scraps and spare parts. So, half an hour later, when Wiz's father came in, he had managed to reduce the pile to only the essentials, as well as a small stack of iron scraps that the goblins had been using as armor plates. One of them appeared to be an old cast-iron frying pan, now split nearly in half, but he was going to reforge it anyhow, so its current state didn't matter much as long as you ignored the smell when he put in the forge to heat. "Did you find everything that you need?" he asked as he watched the dragonkin sorcerer pump the bellows to heat the forge. "Yep. There was an iron pan on one of the goblins, and it gave me all the material I needed for the frame. Please let me know if you need me. I'll be here most of the night." Dominic replied, not even looking away from his work. Dominic didn't even notice when the food came out. He was busy shaping the frame for the pistol, and he didn't notice when the lights in the house went out. He was finishing the cylinder. But after that, he was beyond grateful for the consideration that Wiz's family had shown an eccentric stranger who got too focused on projects. Drilling the barrel out took hours, and rifling it took nearly as long. But the actual inscriptions that would give the design its magic went much more smoothly. As Pops had taught him, Dominic drew the designs on paper and stuck it to the weapon before selecting a monster core and crushing it into dust to make the paint with for the magical runes. It still felt a bit lacking, but when the sun came up in the morning, the mana pistol had taken shape and was ready for the infusion of mana that would imbue it with the final surge of magic that it needed. Dominic had drawn the Dwarven Swiftness rune on it, along with the runes and magical circuitry from the plan that should allow it to be reloaded with pure mana. It felt like it should work as it was, but his throat was feeling better, and Dominic was certain that a bit of dragon fire was just what this project needed. What was the worst that could happen? He would lose a monster core and a night's work. That was acceptable because if it worked it would be magnificent. With a huff and a burst of energy, the weapon was engulfed in flames, finalizing its creation. Creation complete. Rare item created. Mana pistol of refreshing swiftness holds 6 rounds. May be reloaded at the cost of 1 mana. Rounds fired from this weapon do additional fire damage and restore a minor amount of mana on hit. Attack speed increased by 10%. It was an actual rare quality item, and a superbly balanced one. It had everything that you could ask for in a pistol as far as Dominic knew, and he was eager to show it to Bella. A magical gun would be a massive increase in damage for the mystic gunslinger. Chapter 34. Mana Revolver. There was only one problem with having created a rare quality magic item with perfectly balanced stats. Nobody he knew could even afford to buy it. It was a nice notion to give it to his new friend, but in the city that gun was worth more than the farm they were staying on, and not just by a little bit. Dominic wasn't flat broke anymore after the trip with the caravan, and he would be getting his share of the bounty from the goblineers, but a rare quality magical pistol was so ridiculously valuable that it hurt the heart to even think of giving such a thing away. But he didn't know how to use it. Well, in theory he did, but he hadn't trained in it. Not just that, but his core skill wasn't related to gunslinging, and he didn't own any other Magitech orbs or skill gems that would help him to target. It would just be a waste to use it himself. So he was left with a dilemma. Should he return to the mayor to arrange the auction of the newly crafted weapon? Or should he try to work out a deal with Bella? It wasn't an easy answer, at least not when he was looking at a single piece of adventurer's gear that could buy him a farm or a simple life like Pops had, making tools in the city in a smithy that he owned outright. Of course, getting a shop was the easy part. Getting customers was much more difficult, and many shops closed down every year after their clientele was drawn away by a new business opening somewhere else in the city. Plus, the air in the big city was terrible. The only thing it had going for it was the fact that the people with all the money lived there. This was a whole new experience for Dominic. Everything that he had scrounged, made and sold in his whole life wasn't worth what he could make from one item made with a lucky recipe drop as an apprentice blacksmith. As he understood it, from his family's intensive tutoring as a child before tragedy had befallen his family, and he had been chased off by the invading soldiers, the drops were a result of the monster binding tower, a Magitech device somewhere in the world that rewarded those who killed the threats to humanity. Ironically, while he wouldn't get a drop item from human bandits, there was an excellent chance that he would give them one if they killed him. It was completely unfair in Dominic's estimation, but that was how things were, and the majority of monsters, such as the goblins, were a menace to everyone. Then a sudden realization came to him. He didn't have to stop at just one pistol. He had the plan and he had more materials so he could make another. But if he remembered right, Pops had said that you couldn't buy rare quality items with coins, you had to trade valuables for them. Perhaps he would be able to get more plans from the sale if he made another that came out at rare quality. But that would have to wait. He had been up all night, and he didn't know what everyone else had planned for the day. Bella came out while Dominic was considering what to do, only to stop and stare at the pistol sitting on the table by the forge. "Is that what you were doing all night? It's beautiful and powerful. What sort of core are you going to mount into the butt of the handle?" She whispered, as if speaking too loudly would make it disappear. "I'm not sure. I don't actually have any enhancement gems, and I don't have a recipe to make any of the relevant combat trinkets. In fact, I have never shot a pistol in my life," Dominic explained. "So, the first real recipe that you got as an apprentice blacksmith was for a gunsmith, and it's a weapon that you can't even use properly? That's the strangest thing that I have ever heard of. Normally, the rewards are focused on the things that you need." Bella's confused look was rather entertaining, so Dominic handed her the pistol. "Here, tell me if that works properly, and if it's balanced correctly. I mean, I think it is, but since I'm not an expert, I can't guarantee anything." Bella gave the weapon an expert spin on her palm, and then popped the cylinder open before pausing and smiling. "You can reload it with mana. Just a single mana for 6 shots. Do you have any idea how much that will save on ammunition? They're a copper coin a shot when you buy in bulk. Most of the time, I barely break even after restocking on ammunition for the month. Then there are all the enchantments that are already on it, and it doesn't even have a core in the socket yet." She whispered reverently. There was a noise outside, and the barking of the guard dogs, which caused Bella to race outside to see what the problem was. There were foxes at the edge of the farm, going for the chicken coops, and they weren't scared of the guard dogs. Instead, part of the fox pack was distracting the guard dogs, while the rest of their group looked for a way to get at the chickens. Bella fired a single shot, and the closest fox spouted fire from a hole in its head for an instant before falling dead. The sound of the gun startled the other foxes, and they bolted for the tree line. Their agility was impressive, but they weren't fast enough to escape Bella, who worked the pistol with blinding speed, firing over and over, then pausing for a split second while she reloaded, and firing again. In a matter of seconds, 8 foxes lay dead, and an overjoyed Bella was cradling the pistol as if it were her firstborn child. Asking her for it back now was likely to break her heart, so Dominic did the next best thing. He suggested payment. "You know, I would be willing to sell that if you have something that's worth it in trade," he suggested, expecting the mystic gunslinger to pass back the valuable weapon. But instead, her eyes lit up in joy, and she ran into the house. That was not at all what Dominic had been expecting, so he followed the dark-haired young woman into the small farmhouse, where the smell of pancakes and frying bacon filled the air. "Hey, old man, there are 8 foxes out there that need cleaned and skinned. I'll help you in a minute. I need to get something out of the safe," Bella was calling, while Wiz's dad laughed at her stumbling steps. She had kicked her boots off at the door, but she hadn't slowed down to regain her footing, and she was doing her best just to remain upright. It was like a slow-motion train wreck as she staggered across the house and into the wall, where she bounced off and turned into her and Wiz's bedroom. Wiz's startled shout was followed by a thump and a curse, while his parents laughed. "The safe is under her bed, you see. It looks like everyone is up bright and early today," Wiz's father joked as the burly crusader made his way out of the room in a hastily donned set of trousers held up by suspenders. "Bloody mad woman. What did you do to her? She used to be somewhat sane in the morning," Wiz complained. "I'll explain later. I think your mom has bacon ready." Dominic deflected. "Don't think that I'm going to forget. You owe me an explanation for whatever was so important that I was tossed out of bed this early in the morning. The food's not even ready yet." Bella came running back out and pulled Wiz into a hug. "He made one. I never thought I'd find one out here, and we both know that only a noble can get one in the city, but he made one all by himself," Bella explained without actually explaining what she was talking about. was understood right away. A rare quality pistol? Bullshit. There's no way that's what he got as a recipe drop from a goblin. Wiz retorted. Bella placed the pistol on the table, along with 2 scrolls and a fistful of enhancement cores. These might not be quite the equal, but it's everything that I have, Bella explained. Common guns word recipe. Uncommon cogwork plate armor recipe. Enhancement gems mana recovery, spell power, endurance. Magitech orb minor skill gain rate increase. Now, those items individually wouldn't add up to anything close to the value of the rare pistol. But it looked like these were all duplicates of the ones that Bella was using for herself, which made for a balanced and potent combination of enhancements. Unfortunately for Dominic, the only sockets that he had on his equipment to mount them were on his necklace, which now held minor illusion and the blacksmithing trade skill core. He was going to have to improve his equipment to something better so he could actually use the enhancements that he needed in combat. There should be some drops in his inventory cube, Dominic hoped. He hadn't actually sorted through it after the fights yesterday. But the goblins usually dropped a load of trash that would end up in the recycle piles in the city. Sometimes that trash had something good, though. A few mechanical bits, a damaged universal socket that he could fix and resell, or even a few coins hidden in pockets that weren't sorted by the cube until you checked them. A quick search showed him what he had been hoping to find. There was a socketed item in the pile of junk that the goblins had given him. It was a non-magical item, a leather bracer, but it had 2 spots for enhancement cores to be fitted into. But then, he also had quite a bit of scrap iron and copper from the goblins, as everyone else left it behind as worthless, and he now had an armor recipe. It didn't look like he would be getting any sleep today after all. Chapter 35. Cogwork Armor. As they ate breakfast, Wiz looked over at Dominic with a smile. You know, with you being awake all night, we didn't have to keep watch at all. Nothing came close enough to the farm with you banging away. Are you normally on a night schedule? He asked. Dominic shook his head. Not really. I am normally in the shop during the day. I just got excited last night. I'll probably be in the forge all day again today after a short nap, working on armor from that recipe Bella traded me. With a bit of luck, I might have enough materials to improve my own gear and then make a second piece for sale. Wiz smiled and looked down at himself. It might take a bit of extra material to make gear in my size. Good thing that the drop items from the monsters fit themselves to the one who gets them. If they didn't, I'd never get gear. Terry laughed at his son's antics, then sighed and looked out at the field. Before we get too far into planning, can I borrow Dominic for a bit? The harvester has some broken blades, and the scythe needs a fresh edge. It's not often that we have a proper blacksmith around and all. He began. It's no problem at all. Bring what you need fixed. I'll have the forge hot all day anyhow, and I can work on it while I'm reheating the armor. Dominic agreed. He was a guest here, but room and board weren't really free when you were on a farm. Every hand was needed to get things done, and if that meant fixing tools as he crafted gear, then that was his room rent. Everyone split up to go to their morning chores, and Terry followed Dominic to the forge, which was still hot from his overnight work. He looked down at the pile of coal, barely touched, thanks to the teaching of Pops on how to keep a forge properly stoked so that it gave off the heat you needed with a minimum amount of fuel. There turned out to be far more than a little wrong with the harvester. The teeth had broken on the reciprocating cutter because they had gotten caught on each other. They had gotten caught on each other because the upper blade had rotated downward, and that had happened because the frame had been bent by what looked like multiple kicks from the plow horse. Wiz's family couldn't afford a steam tractor, so the horse still pulled all the farm implements, and from the condition of the harvester, the creature wasn't particularly impressed with the situation. Dominic didn't say anything as he took the machine apart and contemplated how he was going to get it bent back straight. Pops had a magical torch to make this job easier, and so did the mobile forge in the caravan. But there wasn't one among the basic tools that Pops had gifted to his new apprentice. The only real solution seemed to be to take the whole side off the harvester and heat it on the forge so that it didn't crack when he started to hammer the dents out. Terry was looking quite sheepish by the time that Dominic had finished the disassembly process, as he was ultimately responsible for leaving the horse unattended with an expensive piece of machinery that it despised. But Dominic wasn't judging him at all. just collecting the scraps of iron from his storage cube and tossing them into a crucible. "How much steel do you need for that armor plate?" Terry asked while Dominic sorted through what looked like a pile of salvaged trash. "Not too much. A kilogram or so is more than enough to do a chest plate with shoulder and upper leg guards," Dominic replied with a shrug. Terry ran out of the forge building and quickly returned with a large chunk of something rusty in his hands. "It's not pretty, but it's iron. More than enough for the job, I dare say. I picked it up in the woods a few years back where a caravan had left it by the road as unsalvageable. I was hoping to cut it down and use it to fix tools, but I never got around to practicing," he explained. "That will do perfectly. Just let me get out the saw and I will cut it down small enough for the crucible." Dominic agreed with a smile. It would have to be smelted down to get rid of all that rust, but there was bound to be some good steel left in a bar that heavy. The clanging became a constant counterpoint to everything that Wiz and Bella did around the farm that day, setting a rhythm that they worked to, and eventually even made up silly songs in time to, much to his mother's annoyance. The harvester was finished in only a few hours, but still, the noise continued as Dominic worked and Terry kept bringing him broken items from anywhere he could find them. Even the damaged kitchen cleaver and one large pot managed to make it out to the forge by the middle of the afternoon. "Aren't you working him a bit too hard? You know he's been up all night," June asked her husband. "He's still working on armor plates. They're going to be right pretty, I reckon, with all that work he's putting into them," Terry replied with a shrug. The clanging ended just before dinner was ready, and Dominic came in with a large sack slung over his shoulder and a smile on his face, wearing dark steel shoulder plates with a matching steel chest plate over the tattered black mage robe that he had gotten from the trip to fight goblins, and thigh guards strapped over his leather pants, though those weren't visible while he was wearing the robes. "That's crazy, you're better armored than I am, and you're the spellcaster," Wiz laughed. Dominic dropped the bag on the floor between them. "Not for long. Your father had some spare steel, and I practiced my blacksmithing on it to get my skills up before I tried doing my own armor. I'm up to level 3 on my blacksmith trade skill core, by the way. Now try that on and we will see how it fits," he announced. Inside was the first attempt that he had made at the cogwork plate armor. It had come out as uncommon, but only barely. The armor rating on it was fairly decent, as it was a solid steel plate armor piece of uncommon magical quality, but the only other bonus it had was a single mana regained on hit. It certainly didn't seem impressive, but the shoulder pads were the same way for a second mana on hit, and the full leg plates he had made were extra durable. That seemed like a good enough bonus for the set, as the legs were the most often attacked body part in a fight against goblins. Plus, the 3 pieces had the cogwork armor pattern's signature magical effect. The pieces latched together on their own when you put them on. It was a small bit of magical circuitry, making the armor technically a form of technomagic, despite its mundane function. Was hurried to equip them over his work pants, smiling more and more as he maneuvered the plates into position. Getting into a full plate set actually required 2 people most of the time, but if you attached the shoulders to the chest before you put the larger piece on, or if you had a bit of flexibility, all the pieces of a cogwork armor set could be equipped by yourself. For Wiz, as he was a frontline fighter, Dominic had pounded out a skirt of overlapping steel strips to protect his hips and lower belly, where the plate might ride up as he moved. It gave him nearly complete coverage from his boots to his neck, far better than the common grade goblin items he had been wearing, and stylishly blackened to take off the shine and prevent rust. "I didn't have an opportunity to do your arms, but the rest of you looks very stylish." Dominic congratulated the stocky crusader before being engulfed in a hug that rang with steel plates colliding. Maybe he was too soft, giving away a fully functional test piece. But Pops had done the same for him, and the saber was much higher quality workmanship. Chapter 36. Alarm bells ringing. The next morning started predictably far too early in the morning, but not because they were feeling energetic. Instead, the family woke up to one of the neighbors ringing the alarm bell, signaling that monsters had made it past the forest and were in the fields. Wiz had been so excited last night that he had slept in his armor, and the banging of him getting out of bed woke Dominic, who was sleeping on a futon cushion near the fireplace in the main room. "Get up, they need us out there. None of the nearby farms have fighters at them, They're all younger families. He insisted. All right, I'm getting up. Just give me a minute. Dominic sighed, then pulled his robes over his head and began working on equipping his armor. His own armor was uncommon quality, the same as Wiz's, but it had all formed with a small amount of spell haste and spell damage thanks to the Swiftness Forge rune that he had learned and a bit of luck. If it had been all mana on hit, he likely would have traded it to Bella and tried again when he got home, as his primary attack didn't burn through his mana pool at all. Eventually, he would get a gem or a Magitech orb that would give him a regularly used spell that needed mana. But that day hadn't come yet, so Dominic was still working with what he had been born with. It didn't take them long to get ready, with Bella helping Dominic and Dominic fastening Bella's armor buckles. The warning bells were still ringing when they burst out the door, chasing after Wiz, who was already running toward the next farm out toward the forest. Damn, that boy can run, Dominic complained, wishing that his dragon side had given him supernatural strength and endurance instead of cat-like agility and a pretty face. Especially the face, that had gotten him into more dangerous situations than anything else, even more often than his hobby of digging through damaged and malfunctioning Magitech parts looking for treasure. They only caught up when Wiz crashed into combat with a hobgoblin. Literally crashed, as he put his shoulder down behind his shield and his sword forward to impale the creature and throw him backward away from a terrified farmer who was holding a broken pitchfork. As far as weapons go, the pitchfork was severely underrated in Dominic's opinion. It was long and pointy with multiple spines to seek out weak points in the opponent's defense. You could certainly pick a worse tool for the job. The major concern was how a hobgoblin had gotten past the guard patrols. They weren't small enough to hide in the grass, so someone should have seen him coming. But the guards from the town were still on their way here, as they had only left when the warning bell was rung. Then Dominic reached the peak of a small hill and realized the truth. It wasn't just the hobgoblin, there was an entire raiding party in the fields. Dozens of goblins, a total of 3 hobgoblins and 1 shaman. That was far more than any farmer could be realistically expected to fight off. Even if they had money for proper weapons, it would go to improvements to their farm or their farming skills, not to combat equipment. Even Terry didn't ask for any combat equipment for himself, only replacements for his combat-loving crusader son, who had chosen to take up the sword instead of becoming someone's burly farm husband. The first hobgoblin was in a bad spot, being both shorter and less violent than the crusader, who was hacking the creature apart as it bled out from the initial wound to its chest. The roar of the hobgoblin's companions echoed through the fields as the attackers gave up their pretense of stealth, and the other hobgoblins moved to surround Wiz. Their smaller kinsfolk split up, attacking the farmers and trying to charge Bella, whose new pistol was picking them off faster than they could decide if they were going to fight or run away. "This thing is amazing," she shouted, then fell to the ground to let a flurry of goblin arrows fly over her head. "Glad you like it," Dominic called back as he finally reached the battle. The shaman was hiding in the back, casting some sort of spell that had his staff, a gnarled oak branch, crackling with lightning. The creature's strange feathered headdress came into clear focus as Dominic drew on the magic in his body, letting it flow through his eyes and channel an arcane blast directly into the shaman's face. The lightning spell faltered for an instant as the vile creature's face was scorched, but a single spell wasn't enough to take it out, even with the help of his newly enhanced equipment. If he had a higher-level enhancement core socketed into his gear, his innate magic surely would have been enough to take out the shaman. But there hadn't been time to do it before the goblins had attacked. Attunement took some time, and he would have to finish fitting it into the armor as well. But most importantly, he would need monster cores to level it up. Unlike the trade skill cores, the enhancement gems and Magitech orbs wouldn't level up on their own, unless you had some cool special ability or another Magitech item that would allow them to. The goblin's lightning magic came to a crescendo, and a single bolt of lightning streaked down from the sky, hitting the house and lighting the thatch roof on fire. All that effort and he targeted the house. Dominic wondered, but then he realized that it was actually a brilliant plan on behalf of the goblins, as 2 women, an elderly man and 9 children came running out of the burning house, where a swarm of goblins was charging toward them. "Bella, the house," Dominic called as he ran toward the farmyard and prepared another spell. The lightning began to charge again, Dominic could feel it on his skin, pulling his attention away from the goblins as he ran toward the children. A shift of his attention and the second arcane blast hit the shaman square in the chest, dropping it to the ground dead. But the distraction left Dominic far too close to a packed swarm of goblins, without time to cast another spell and only a dagger in his hand. His advance was stalled as he swayed to avoid a filthy goblin blade, then lunged forward to drive his dagger through the creature's throat. That was one down, and Dominic skidded to a stop between the children and the goblins, giving himself time to get his saber out of his storage cube. They were all clustered together, headed for the same target, and when his fiery breath spread out, burning through his throat and scorching his lips, the entire pack of them was engulfed in dragon flames, a sticky magical fire that was incredibly difficult to put out without large amounts of water. Then Bella was beside him, cycling her new revolver at a rate as fast as both of her other pistols combined, dropping the burning goblins like targets at a carnival. Dominic was fairly sure that you could operate that weapon one-handed, but the fancy thing she was doing with her other hand to cycle the weapon seemed to be helping to increase her firing speed by quite a bit. "Can I get a little help over here?" was yelled out as he fought off two hobgoblins at once. Dominic and Bella shared a smile before they turned their attention on the last attackers. 3 rapid-fire bullets and an arcane blast took one of them in the back, and it swayed on its feet, already dead but not quite bright enough to have realized it yet. Wiz kicked it over backward and raised his shield to fend off the final attacker. "Thanks for that. If we can get them all down before the guards get here, we get a small bonus for the defense." Wiz laughed as his oversized blade chopped an arm off the hobgoblin at the same time that a single round from Bella's pistol hit its temple, splattering green goblin blood everywhere. "And the bonus is ours." Bella agreed. Chapter 37. Missing Patrol. As was collected all the ears to turn in for the reward money, Dominic and Bella went to greet the guards, who were jogging down the road toward the site of the battle. "Gentlemen, thank you for your timely response, but we have already taken care of the goblin breach of the boundary patrols. Do we have any idea what went wrong? They so rarely miss anything, much less a patrol with hobgoblins in it," Bella asked. The guards shook their heads. "We have no idea. There haven't been any reports of strange activity today, and you took care of the last big incident a few days ago. I suspect that we won't know what happened until someone fails to come back tonight." The guard replied. That was a harsh truth, but he had a point. The most likely reason that they didn't get a warning about this patrol was because they had overrun the guards who were supposed to be holding them off. The leader of the guard team went forward to take a note of the number of ears collected by Wiz, as well as any damaged property on the affected farms, in case they were going to need some sort of relief. The guard did the best that they could to protect the farms, but there were no guarantees, and a particularly bad attack could cost them everything, even if they managed to escape. In those cases, the locals would chip in to help the family get set up again, but it would normally take years for things to really get back to normal after a crop was lost and a home was raised. "We need to head back to the gate. We're on standby for the next attack. But can you keep an eye out on the forest for us? We could use as much advance notice as we can get if there is another attack," the guards asked. The farmer scoffed at the notion that he wouldn't be watching for more attacks today. "I don't think I'll be sleeping anytime soon, so that isn't a problem. I'm just thankful that these fine folk showed up on time to deal with the problem. We thought it was just a couple of goblins at first. Then suddenly there were hobgoblins running at us, and it was chaos." The leader of the guard team looked over the familiar faces of Wiz and Bella with a trained eye, making sure the local adventurers were ready for battle and weren't injured, and then nodded. Their enhancement gems might still be low level, but that's nothing that time won't fix. Their gear is good, and they have crafted magical weapons. That is the part that matters most against these beasts, being able to hack cleanly through them, and not letting that leathery skin turn your blade away while they pounce on you, the guard assured the farmer. It wasn't like the farmer needed to be sold on the strength of Bella and Wiz. They had grown up here, and he'd known them all their lives. He just needed a little positive affirmation to help settle his mind after the attack. "We're going to run off to the tree-line and see if we can find where they crossed over. One of the teams might need assistance," Wiz informed the guards as they were preparing to head back to the city. That didn't sound like the best idea that the big crusader had ever had, But if he was right, there might be injured local guards in the woods, or even more goblins coming their way after finding a gap in the lines. Both were terrible news for the farmers, who couldn't even properly run away with young children on the farms. Dominic had to jog to keep up with Wiz as he headed for the trees, but that kept him from overthinking the situation and talking himself into turning around. Because he really wanted to turn around and not go into the woods hunting goblins in the dark with only 2 other people, no matter how good their gear was. Their lack of numbers wasn't slowing Wiz, and his tracking seemed to be pretty good, as he found broken branches and fresh goblin blood almost immediately after reaching the tree line. Now we just follow that in. It looks like at least one was injured when they arrived, so it shouldn't be too hard. Goblin blood is stinky, oily stuff. It might make good lantern oil if it didn't smell so bad, he explained. Just don't get us too close. I can't shoot my way out of close combat, and Dominic is literally half your size. Bella reminded him. No worries, we're just looking for the patrol team in this zone and wherever the blood starts. I'm hoping that's the last of them, but I've got a bad feeling about this, Wiz explained. That made all 3 of them. Slowly they made their way through the woods, following the blood trail and the obvious signs of passing hobgoblins. The creatures got mad at the branches for poking them, so they would smash them with their clubs and blades to clear the way, leaving a distinct path behind them, even if one of the goblins wasn't bleeding. Not long after, they came to a clearing, where there had been a vicious battle, which included at least 1 spellcaster, as there were scorch marks on both the goblin bodies and the trees. Was checked through the bodies of the fallen goblins, which were all missing their left ear, and pointed to the east. It looks like our scouts won the fight, but a bunch of goblins fled the battle and made it to the farms. There are signs of a litter being dragged this way, and something large following behind them, too large to be a human. Dominic looked over the Crusader, and Bella laughed. When he says too big to be human, he means bigger than he is. The mystic gunslinger remarked in a wry tone. Well, that's not good. We should probably find them, now that we know they're alive and moving. Dominic agreed. If they were dragging their wounded with them, they wouldn't be moving very quickly. The goblins had headed straight for the town, and they were running, so by Dominic's less than expert guess, they were only 10 minutes or so behind the patrol. They could make that up in no. Chapter 38. Unwanted Visitor. The trio followed along the path left by the wounded patrol, which did not seem to be moving as fast as expected. Some of the prints were circling the group or pacing back and forth, a sign that they certainly weren't moving at a full walking pace, compared to the fast walk of Dominic and the others. Then they heard the sound of combat up ahead, much closer than expected. There were shouts from the guards and the squeal of goblins, but also a deeper voice yelling at the goblins for their incompetence. The healer, take out their cleric, you worthless sacks of snot. Not that one. Do I have to do everything myself? Then they heard the sound of wood splintering and a pained yelp from one of the guardsmen. See, hit the healer and they don't fight as good, the deep voice declared as was burst through the tree line with his shield raised. He made a hard left and Dominic saw his target. An ogre was leading the goblin patrol. The brutish humanoid stood a whole head taller than their burly crusader, and the knotted log in its hand was stained with fresh blood. The guards hadn't gotten a chance to set up their defensive formation, which had left the cleric exposed when the ogre advanced. He was now bleeding on the ground, but conscious and trying to work a healing spell on himself. Dominic moved to follow Wiz, while Bella opened fire on the backs of the goblins. Now that she could reload with mana, she wasn't shy at all about her firing rate, and only aimed carefully when the angle brought her trajectory close to a guardsman. Dominic hit the ogre in the head with an arcane blast, but the spell barely scorched its head, and the creature didn't even look his way. Ogres are magic resistant, was wheezed as he skidded to a sudden stop between the ogre and the beleaguered guards after taking a hit to the shield from the ogre's massive club. The crusader and the ogre traded hesitant blows with each other, testing their opponent's defenses, and it became obvious that both of them were incredibly durable and could respond with similar reaction times. Isn't that just great? Dominic mumbled as he adjusted his plan. He had 2 decent daggers, one that he made and one with goblin poison. If spells didn't work, maybe poison would slow it down. He could start with the saber, But Dominic suspected that his current physical strength would not match up to what would be needed to do real damage with a long blade. Though it was possible, as the blade was uncommon grade and forged by Pops. He barely reached the creature's chest, but today that wasn't going to matter. Dominic put his head down and charged toward the back of the monster, which allowed him to slice both daggers across the back of the ogre's knees, then dart away. It roared in pain as one knee buckled and was managed to land a hard blow to its side. But his luck was cut short as the log that it used as a club crashed into his side and knocked the crusader to the ground. The ogre moved to stomp on his head, but Dominic was right there, and the poisoned dagger cut deep into the top of its planted foot, sending it tumbling to the ground. The guards were on it before it even landed, slicing into its arm tendons and stabbing into its chest with spears. Nothing was cutting as deep as they hoped, but the spearmen had it pinned down as the others worked to take it out. Wiz glowed with a shining green light as he activated his healing spell, but his combat expertise was no longer needed. The goblins were dead, and the ogre was being methodically hacked apart as the guards surrounded it. Dominic helped the cleric back to his feet, and he sighed in disappointment as he saw the ruins of his helmet. "I liked that one. It fit just right," he complained. "How many of your team members were lost? Should we call for more clerics from town?" Dominic asked in return, wondering if the cleric's brain was a bit addled from the hit. 7 in critical but stable condition when the fight started. "Now I don't know, but we need to inform the city. None of these were coming for us. They passed by town headed for the city." "But how did you know where we were?" "Don't take it that I'm not grateful you found us, but we weren't expecting reinforcements. Part of the first group you found split off and went for the farms. One was wounded and we tracked it back." "Well, Wiz did," Dominic explained. "You're the good kind of crazy little dragonkin." The cleric laughed, then dusted himself off and went to check on his team. There weren't any major injuries. The real danger had been the ogre, and Wiz had taken the brunt of that attack. Wiz was in rough shape from a pair of solid hits, but he had healed himself of the worst of the damage, and he would recover. If it hadn't been for Bella clearing out the goblins so quickly, which allowed the guards to swarm the ogre, things might have turned out very differently. The cleric stumbled as he tried to walk, and Dominic moved to tuck under his arm. "Let me help you until you're a bit more stable. I'm sure you're exhausted from the fights, but we need to get everyone out of the woods and another team sent here to cover this zone for the day. And someone sent to the road to have the next rider or caravan passing by warn the city about the incoming monsters." The cleric agreed. His words seemed to motivate the team, and they were up and moving in seconds, helping each other toward the road. Nearly every one of them had a body part visibly bandaged, as the healer was out of mana and exhausted, but they were all alert and prepared in case there was another attack. 2 scouts were sent ahead with a letter for the city, to either deliver in person or to hand to a faster-moving rider along the way. They had no way of knowing how things were going in the city, but if they weren't warned, it would be even worse for the city guard than it had been for the village patrols. Chapter 39. News from the city. When they reached the road, there was a small group of mechanical horse riders present, speaking with the scouts in an urgent tone too quiet to be understood from a distance. The animated hand gestures on both sides said that they were in agreement, and it was not an agreement about something good. "Hey, Dominic, you're from the city, right? Come over here for a moment. The city is talking about shutting the gates for the next few days, or even a week. So if you want to get home, you should do it now," the scout called when they approached. "So they have heard the news?" Dominic asked, running over to the mechanical horses. "Not yet. They have been seeing numerous attacks on the farms and the outlying areas, so they're considering closing the gates to keep the city's civilians out of the way while they deal with the issue. We were sent to the town to inform them, and now we're on the way back to let the nobles know that things are getting ugly out here," one of the riders informed him. Dominic looked to Wiz and Bella, who just shrugged. The choice was up to him, but they would obviously be staying at Wiz's place. With all that was going on, Bella wouldn't be accompanying the caravan on its next leg, assuming it was planning to leave the village at all. "The caravan you came with isn't leaving the town for another week at a minimum," they decided. After all the reports of attacks, It was time to take a little break and get everything polished up and ready. The rider added, "Well, that settled that question. I should get back to work. If there really is something big going on, they're going to need tools and supplies much more than one spellcaster. Plus, I need to prepare for the Royal Apprentice intake exams, and that requires more time to actually work in the forge. Just stay safe and don't do anything dumb while I'm gone. You know, like charging an ogre alone." Dominic joked. We smiled. "I'll bring Bella with me for sure. Don't worry, we won't be headed out on any patrols until we get the news that the problem is solved. My parents are a farmer and a garden witch. They're not fighters, and I couldn't bear to leave them exposed right now." That explained why he was intent on getting so powerful but was still at home and not adventuring like others as well-trained as he was normally would be. "Well, if you need a ride, hop on up here, and I will run you back to the city." "What part do you need to go to?" one of the riders asked. "I'm Pop's apprentice, the smith by the staging area," he replied. "Really now? That's perfect, we were going to the staging area anyhow. That will be the first spot that needs the news, so we wanted to tell them before we let the nobles know." The leader of the riders informed her. "All right, let's go then." Dominic agreed, and took the rider's hand to toss himself up on the horse. "I forgot how easy that is with someone who's not in. Wait, you are in full armor. How light are you without it?" the rider asked. "I'm not some muscle-bound giant of a soldier. Plus, good armor is light and doesn't tire you out just wearing it for the day." Dominic shrugged. The riders took off, ending their banter with the need to hold on to the mechanical horse as it raced through the woods along the rough road. Crossing that terrain made Dominic appreciate the strange contraptions a little more. They were far smoother to ride than the carriages, thanks to their ability to step over bumps and potholes in the dirt road, and when they weren't escorting a convoy they were remarkably fast. The way that the gears worked together, activated from a complex set of camshafts that adjusted the gate, was a marvel of engineering, and while they were technically a magical device, the magic only kept them moving, the rest was all mechanical actuation. In short, he wanted one. He really wanted one. Dominic intended to find out how much they would cost when he got back to the city, but if his estimate were right, it would be most of a year's wages for a blacksmith, even if he kept taking the escort missions once the city was sending out convoys again. The only other option would be to learn to make one of them himself, but that wasn't realistic unless he could either get himself enrolled in one of the universities or sneak into their library to copy the plans. Perhaps Pops could hook him up with a little something to make some side money. He had been the one to recommend that Dominic take this trip, so there were likely more ways to make money that he didn't know about yet. As they approached the city, an ongoing battle between the Signia city guards and a swarm of goblins was blocking the road, and a pair of ogres in the distance could be seen giving orders. "That's the craziest thing that I've ever seen. Since when do ogres and goblins get along?" the soldier that Dominic was riding behind muttered. "We saw another one today. It attacked that patrol you met on the road. We took it down, but even with half a patrol, we could barely keep it restrained until it died." Dominic replied, "Well, the city guards have a bit more advanced gear. The noble officers have high-pressure rifles, higher-level enhancement orbs, and some powerful magic items. I'm pretty sure they can take care of them well enough. What I don't understand is why there are so many of them, and why they're all here. I hope you've got a gun ready. There isn't room for a bow when you're riding second seat." Dominic chuckled and shook his head. "I'm a sorcerer, I attack with magic," he replied, startling the rider. "Well, that's a bit shocking. I heard that you were a blacksmith." "I'm that too. Trade skills and innate magic don't always match up evenly. But give me some time, and I'll make good use of them both." The riders moved into a wedge formation, with the lead 5 riders taking out extendable lances from the side packs on the horses and charging through the goblin force, while the rear 5 shot down everything that was getting back up. Dominic fired Arcane Blast, and lamented the fact that he couldn't reach them to loot them. It felt a bit petty to consider that in this circumstance, but the need to get what he could, while he could, was trained bone deep. Plus, Pops would want as much of the copper from their daggers as he could get. The horses came to a sliding stop as the ground seemed to explode in front of them. Dominic searched around for a shaman, but he couldn't see the trademark bone necklaces and feathered ornaments of the goblin spellcasters. Then another explosion hit only a dozen meters to their left, and he realized what was happening. The city was firing cannons at the goblins, and they didn't care enough to avoid firing toward the inbound riders. Get in past the guard lines as fast as you can, the team leader ordered, pushing his steed forward, running over the goblins as he advanced. The riders were kicking goblins away as they charged, doing their best to avoid being unhorsed. It was going fairly well, right until they reached the front ranks and realized that the guard wasn't going to part for them to pass through. Dismount and fight your way clear. Dominic pulled his goggles down over his eyes and lifted his feet to stand on the mechanical steed, then launched himself over the front rank of mechanical horses with a dagger in each hand. The goblins there were already unbalanced, and if he played his cards right, he could not only stab one to death, but also be the first to loot the corpses. The unfortunate goblin had no chance when a pair of daggers dug into its back, and Dominic landed on the soft, but filthy, pile of corpses. There was definitely loot to be had, so he didn't try to run between the guardsmen right away, and instead turned down the line, unleashing an arcane blast into a hobgoblin, then slicing at his knee tendons, the same as he had done to the ogre. Against the weaker monster, the tactic was brutally effective. The hobgoblin's legs both collapsed, sending it to its knees, while the guard it had been battling crushed its skull with a war hammer. That was his tactic of the day. Slice and loot, cripple the enemy and keep moving so they couldn't break free from their opponent to fight him. Chapter 40 Horned Assassin. The word quickly spread through the guard line of a small assassin moving through the battle, crippling goblins, and everywhere Dominic went, the guard started to make an effort to turn their opponents away from him, allowing his strikes to take dozens of the creatures by surprise before he found a gap in the lines and fired another arcane blast to clear his path to freedom. Once he was behind the guardsmen's lines, Dominic dropped to one knee to catch his breath and slowly fired arcane blasts at anything that tried to exploit the gap he had run through. Once he caught his breath, Dominic got back to his feet and noticed for the first time that he was completely covered in goblin slime. If he was going to go back into the city, he would need to be rinsed off first. The smell was foul, and the only thing keeping him from gagging was the knowledge that opening his mouth would only make the situation worse. Need a rag? I've got a bundle, a voice asked from behind him. A young boy had a wheelbarrow full of torn rags, mostly intended for bandages, but Dominic greedily grabbed two. One for wiping himself off, and one to fashion a crude mask under his goggles. Thanks, kid. He laughed as the boy ran off to the triage center with his precious cargo. Dominic wiped the filthy rag off on the grass, then tucked in his belt for next time. With his hands free and his face clean, he continued his spell barrage until the goblins stopped coming near his position. Their numbers were dwindling, and the guard patrols were beginning to cycle out for freshly rested fighters. The mechanical steeds he had arrived with were all behind the lines now, and a few of the men had returned to them now that their section of the fight had been relieved by fresh soldiers. Soldiers like the ones headed his way. Good work, adventurer. Thanks for the assist. You can head back to the city now. They've got a water which they're creating a shower to rinse everyone clean. The first soldier in line informed him. Thanks for the relief. I'll see you soon. Dominic replied. Not on the front lines, most likely. But the guardsmen were always at the commoners' staging areas anyhow. It was where all the affordable drinking establishments were. There was a large lineup for the showers, and the guards were happily stripping down under the pouring water, rinsing off their gear so that no goblin filth was brought back into the city. Dominic stepped aside, looking for a private area that wasn't the public bath. But there was none.
What a predicament.
He didn't really want to strip in public like the guards, but he wasn't allowed into the city in his condition either. When he made it to the front of the line, the water which gave him a disgusted look, and Dominic gave up on any hope that the woman might take pity on him. Instead of asking, he stepped forward into the water, allowing it to wash the goblin blood from him, then removed and scrubbed his coat and hat before stowing them in his inventory cube. He could let them dry later. Dominic had just begun to use his face mask rag to scrub down his armor and pants when 4 large guards stepped up beside him and offered him a bucket full of soap bars with coarse grit in them to get the dried and caked on goblin blood off. You did good out there. It's the least we could do. One of them mumbled. Thank you. Once he was clean, Dominic quickly stripped and changed into the fancy black mage robe and cloak that the princess's guards had provided him, ignoring the fact that it was now soaked as well. Then he put on his only dry footwear, a pair of soft slippers, and stepped out of the shower area. Once he stepped out in his fancy robes, he saw the water witch's expression turn from open disgust to shock, but he didn't wait for her to say anything, and moved toward the gates, letting the breeze dry him a little while he walked. There was another line for the gates, and the city officials were checking everyone who reached the entrance to the city. "What are they after?" Dominic asked the man beside him without looking up. "Loot. The fight is a guard fight, so they don't want anyone coming out and claiming the good stuff for themselves while the guard takes all the risks," a familiar female voice informed him. Dominic looked up to see Princess Alexis, the younger of the two unwed twin princesses of Signia City, standing next to him, soaked to the bone, the same as he was, and in a black silk suit that closely matched the black silk robe and cloak that Princess Eleanor had gifted Dominic for the dinner after their second battle together. "Then this should be fun. I've got all sorts of stuff on me from my trip to town," Dominic muttered. "Don't worry about it. Hand me your inventory cube and we will walk right through," Princess Alexis whispered back. He reluctantly handed her the small magical device with all his worldly possessions inside, and then fell into step a half-pace behind her and to the left, covering her non-dominant side, and allowing the princess to escort him back inside the city. As they got closer to the front of the line, Dominic adjusted his robes and pulled the hood up to cover his head, despite the heat. The princess shook her head, but Dominic was well aware of how the nobles felt about a sorcerer who was openly mutated or non-human. Not that most of them made the distinction, they just despised everyone who wasn't a noble. The appearance of the duo caused quite a stir among the city's civilian nobles, who were watching from behind the gates as the guardsmen came back inside. The princess was with an unknown young man, returning from the battlefield, and both of them were soaked from the combat showers. It was deluxe, extra juicy, scandalous gossip for their dinner parties. The thought of the princess having to do that with a potential suitor left their chosen candidates and the romances behind. Most of them couldn't even get an invitation to the palace outside official functions. Was that man the princess type? Had they been pushing the most prestigious of established noblemen at a princess who preferred some younger boy who would go out and fight goblins with her? "I could let them see my horns and totally ruin your reputation," Dominic joked as the princess' expression got more and more annoyed as she heard whispers of the idle noble's gossip. "Honestly, it might make things easier if I did. With a ruined reputation, none of their idiot noble sons would want anything to do with me anymore. My father would be furious, but the idea of never having to hear another incestuous suggestion involving my twin sister would be completely worth every bit of father's disappointment." Dominic was quite certain that the princess had mentioned that her father understood her position. Plus, she was close enough to the king to be considered in line for the throne, so it was shocking that something like that had happened more than once. But the history books said that there were always politics and perverts among the elites, and the Signia nobles would not want one of their nation's prized princesses to escape their clutches. They reached the gate guards, who gave them a suspicious look, and then gestured for Dominic to raise his arms. He complied without hesitation, as he didn't have anything at all on his person, other than the single-crafted dagger at his hip. The other dagger and the saber he didn't own a holster for, so he could only really carry them in his inventory cube, or in his hand in combat. The guard made a show of patting him down, even checking to ensure that his horns were real, and not just stuck to his head to disguise a storage item. "Where are the rest of your belongings?" the guard demanded. "At home, of course. What use does a sorcerer have for random trinkets in combat?" Dominic replied with his best attempt at the snooty tone that the nobles used. The princess nearly choked on her tongue at his sudden change of demeanor, but the guard just accepted it as normal for a companion of the princess. "Go ahead then." They stepped into the street, headed for the princess's chosen meeting point with her carriage and driver, as the gossip spread. A sorcerer. The princess had been out fighting alongside a strange sorcerer, and he was so confident in his skills that he didn't even bring along anything but the jewelry with his enhancement cores and spells. "It looks like the rumor mill will be in full swing tonight. How about we head somewhere to eat before I drop you at home? Princess Alexis asked. Food sounds wonderful. It's been a rough day, and I have news to pass along as well. But not in public, unless we want to start a panic.